Welcome back to Curious Potter. Tonight, we pull one thread on one evening in one hall, and we watch 7 years come apart in our hands. Neville Longbottom was the first person in the Great Hall to understand that something had gone wrong. He had been sorted 8 minutes earlier. He was still holding his own hat, the pointed black one, because he had forgotten to put it down, and he was sitting at the Gryffindor table with his shoulders up around his ears. From there, he had a clear view of the stool. He watched Professor McGonagall say the name, Harry Potter, and he watched the hall go quiet in that hungry way a room goes quiet when it thinks it is about to see something. Then the sorting hat went down over Harry's eyes and nothing happened. 10 seconds, 30, a minute, 2 minutes. The candles floated. Somebody's fork scraped a plate and somebody else hissed at them to stop. Neville looked up the table at the older students and saw that even the 7th years had stopped chewing. Professor McGonagall's mouth had gone thin. At the staff table, the small man in the purple turban was pressing his fingers into his temple as though he had a headache, and the black-haired teacher beside him was watching the stool the way a man watches a door he is afraid will open. 4 minutes. It was the longest sorting anyone in that room had ever sat through, and then the brim of the hat opened wide and it called out one word, and the word was Slytherin. Here is the thing Neville remembered for the rest of his life. It was not the word. It was the second afterwards. Nobody clapped. The Slytherin table did not clap, because the boy who had just been given to them had refused Draco Malfoy's hand on the train that afternoon in front of half a carriage, and news travels fast in a house that runs on information. The Gryffindor table did not clap because they had spent the whole summer telling each other that Harry Potter was coming and that he would be theirs. Hufflepuff did not clap because Hufflepuff did not know what was polite. Ravenclaw did not clap because Ravenclaw was still doing the arithmetic. So Harry Potter took the hat off his head and put it down on the stool and walked across a silent hall to a table where nobody moved to make room. And not one person in that room knew that the hat had said something to Harry under the brim in the last 30 seconds. Something short. Something that was not about houses at all. Harry would carry that sentence for 6 years, and he would not repeat it to a living soul until he was 17, and by then it would be the most important thing anyone had ever said to him. Let us go back 4 minutes and get under the hat. The first thing Harry noticed was that it smelled of old rain and that it was thinking at him. The voice was not in his ears. It was somewhere behind his eyes, and it sounded amused and very tired and about 1,000 years old. "Well now," said the hat, "that is an interesting head." Harry gripped the edges of the stool and did not answer. Brave, obviously. You did not flinch when the giant came through the door. There is a temper in here as well, which people will keep mistaking for courage. A good mind, but a lazy one, because nobody has ever asked you to use it. Loyal. Very loyal. And you have not had anybody to be loyal to yet, which is going to make you dangerous when you do. Where does that put me? Harry thought. You already know, said the hat. You have known since you touched that wand in the shop and it was warm. You have a thirst to be somebody, not to be liked, to be somebody. You have already learned to lie to adults smoothly, which no 11-year-old learns for fun. And there is a will in here like a bar of iron. Slytherin would make you great. Salazar's house has been waiting 11 years for a boy exactly like you. And this is the moment. This is where the whole timeline balances on a pin. In the world we know, Harry thinks 4 words. Not Slytherin, not Slytherin. He thinks them because that morning a pale boy in a robe shop was rude about Hagrid, and that afternoon the same boy insulted Ron Weasley's family, and because Hagrid had told him on a rocking boat that there was not a witch or wizard who went bad who was not in Slytherin. Harry pleads, and the hat, which takes choice seriously, listens to him and shouts, "Gryffindor," and 7 years unspool from that mercy. In this world, Harry thinks those words too, He thinks them hard. But the hat had already gone somewhere else. It had gone quiet, the way a person goes quiet when they touch something in the dark and cannot identify it. Harry felt it happen. He felt the amusement drain out of the voice. "Wait," the hat said. "What?" "Be still, boy." And the hat looked properly, all the way down, the way it had not looked into a child's head in a very long time. Somewhere under the ordinary furniture of an 11-year-old, under the cupboard and the broken glasses and the birthday cake with his name spelled wrong, it found a room that had no door. Something was in it. It was awake. And it was listening back. "Not Slytherin," Harry begged. "Please. Anywhere else." The hat took a long moment. Later, much later, Harry understood what that pause had cost it. A talking hat is a piece of enchantment with one job, and it had just found something in a child that no enchantment had a rule for. It could put him in Gryffindor, where he would be loved and warm and never watched. Or it could put him where every adult with any sense keeps the thing they cannot explain, which is close and lit and in plain sight. "I am sorry," said the hat, and it meant it. "You are not being punished. You are being placed. Listen to me now, because I will not get to say this to you twice." And then it said the sentence, "There is something inside you that is not yours. I cannot tell you what it is. I can tell you that it is old, and that it has been there since before you could speak, and that it is going to want things. When you find out what it is, and you will, remember that I saw it and that I put you where you are anyway. Whatever is in there is not the whole of you." Harry did not understand a single word of it. "What?" he said out loud, and his voice cracked across the silent hall, and 200 people heard the boy who lived say one confused syllable from under a hat. The brim opened. "Slytherin." Now watch what happens next, because it is not what you expect. It is better. Harry walked to the far table with his ears roaring. Somebody at the end shifted 3 inches and looked away, which was as close to hospitality as he got. He sat down opposite a girl with a heavy dark plait who examined him like a shopping list. To his left, 4 seats along, Draco Malfoy stared straight ahead at the enchanted ceiling with 2 spots of color high on his cheeks, because Draco had spent the summer telling everyone he would be the one to bring Harry Potter into the fold, and Harry had turned him down in front of witnesses 6 hours ago, and now the prize had landed at his own table where he would have to look at it every single day. The sorting went on. Harry did not hear most of it. He heard one name. Weasley. Ronald. Ron had been standing in the shrinking crowd of first years the whole time. He had been standing there when the hat said Slytherin, and Neville, who was watching everything that night, saw Ron's face do something complicated and quick, and then set. Ron sat on the stool. The hat barely touched his hair. Gryffindor. The Gryffindor table roared, because they needed to roar at something. Ron went and sat down next to his brothers, and he looked once, fast, across the hall. Harry was looking back. That look, across 4 house tables, on the 1st of September 1991, is the reason this timeline does not end the way you think it does. Keep it in your pocket. We will need it in about 6 years. The feast came. The dishes filled. And at the Slytherin table, a boy who had been famous for 9 minutes discovered that his own house had a policy about him, and the policy was silence. It broke exactly once. Halfway through the pudding, a broad-shouldered 5th-year prefect, further up the bench, leaned back and said, without turning round, "Potter, whatever you did to him, he's not going to forget it." "Who?" said Harry. "The Dark Lord," said the prefect, in the flat tone of a boy reciting a family rule. "Some of us have parents who remember. My advice is that you keep your head down and let us decide about you slowly." The girl with the plait, whose name Harry learned was Millicent Bulstrode, said, "Some of our parents went to Azkaban." "And some of our parents did not," said another girl further down in a light, bored voice. She had pale gold hair, and she did not look up from her plate. "Some of our parents just paid for things. Do not tell him our business on the first night, Millicent. Honestly." That was Daphne Greengrass. Remember her? Up at the staff table, 3 people were having 3 different bad evenings. Professor McGonagall was staring at her goblet and doing something she almost never did, which was doubting the hat. She had taught James Potter for 7 years. She had marked his essays and confiscated his contraband and shouted herself hoarse at him across a Quidditch pitch, and she had been quietly, fiercely certain that his son was coming to her. Professor Dumbledore was smiling at the hall in the ordinary way, and behind the smile his mind was moving very fast and very coldly in a direction he did not like. He had spent 10 years arranging a boy's life around one assumption. The assumption was that the mark Voldemort left on Harry Potter that night in Godric's Hollow was a scar. And that a scar is a thing that has already finished happening. The hat had just taken 4 minutes over a child who should have taken 4 seconds. Dumbledore had been alive a long time. He knew what a 4-minute pause meant. It meant the hat had found a question, and Professor Severus Snape sat with his hands flat on the table and understood, before anyone else in the room, exactly what had just been done to him. Lily Evans's son had been placed in his house, not in Gryffindor, where Snape could have hated him comfortably from a safe distance for 7 years. In Slytherin, in his house, in his dungeon, under his door, his responsibility, his signature on every permission slip, his job to protect. A boy with James Potter's face and Lily's eyes was going to sleep 40 feet from Snape's office every night until 1998, and Snape was going to have to keep him alive. He looked down the table at the boy, who was pushing a piece of treacle tart around a plate and being ignored by 50 people, and Severus Snape felt something he had no intention of ever naming. That night the first years followed a prefect down and down, past the kitchens, past the torches, into the dungeons, to a stretch of bare wet stone wall. "Serpentine," said the prefect, and the wall opened. The Slytherin common room is under the lake. Harry had not been told that. He walked in behind 5 other boys and stopped dead because the windows were green, and behind the green there were shapes moving, slow and huge and patient, and the light came through the water and lay on the floor in ripples, so that the whole room looked as though it were very slightly underwater itself. It was, he thought, the most beautiful place he had ever been allowed inside. He hated that he thought it. The prefect showed them the dormitory. 6 4-poster beds, green hangings, and a trunk at the foot of each. Draco Malfoy took the bed by the window without asking. Crabbe and Goyle took the 2 nearest the door because that was where they were put. Theodore Nott, a thin, quiet boy with a permanently unimpressed expression, took the one in the corner and drew his curtains before anyone had taken their shoes off. Blaise Zabini looked at Harry for a long, thoughtful moment and then chose the bed furthest from him. That left Harry the bed in the middle. Of course it did. He lay in the dark, in a room under a lake, in the house that had made Voldemort, and he listened to 5 boys pretending to be asleep, and he thought about a sentence. There is something inside you that is not yours. In the morning he decided he had imagined it. That is what 11-year-olds do with sentences they cannot hold. He was wrong, and it took him 6 years, and a war to find out how wrong. The first lesson that mattered was on Friday morning, and it was potions. Harry sat in the front row because there was nowhere else left. Snape came through the door without a sound and took the register, and when he reached the name Potter, he paused, and the pause had a knife in it. "Ah, yes," he said, "our new celebrity, and it seems mine." In another world, Snape does this in front of a room half full of Gryffindors, and Harry has 20 people who wince for him. In this world, the room is half full of Slytherins, and they are watching their own head of house to learn the correct opinion. Potter, what do I get if I add powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? I do not know, sir, said Harry. Where would you look if I told you to find me a bezoar? I do not know, sir. What is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane? I do not know, sir, said Harry. And then, because he was 11 and had a temper the hat had warned him about. But I think Hermione Granger does. She has had her hand up for a while now. Hermione Granger lowered her hand very slowly. Snape did not look at her. 5 points from Slytherin, said Snape softly, for cheek. The room made a sound. It was the sound of 40 people recalculating at once. He had taken points from his own house on the first Friday for the boy who lived, and every Slytherin in that dungeon understood the message perfectly. Potter is not protected. Potter is fair game. By the end of the week, someone had put a dead frog in Harry's bed. By the end of the month, his ink kept vanishing and coming back empty. His homework got wet, and a fourth year charmed his shoelaces to knot themselves during charms so that he fell down 2 steps in front of everybody. What Harry could not know, and what took him 7 years to learn, was that Snape did that arithmetic on purpose, and it made him sick. A Slytherin who is publicly the favorite of the head of house is a Slytherin whose enemies work in the dark. A Slytherin who is publicly loathed by the head of house is a Slytherin whose enemies get lazy and work in the open, where a teacher can see them. Snape had walked into that classroom knowing that the fathers of 6 children in it had knelt in a circle in a graveyard, and he had chosen the version of Harry Potter that he could keep alive. It still meant that a lonely boy spent his first year believing that the man responsible for him wanted him gone. The other thing that happened that week happened on Saturday at 3 in the afternoon in a hut at the edge of the forest. Harry knocked. Fang barked. Hagrid opened the door with a tea towel over one shoulder, and his enormous face went through about 4 expressions and settled on none of them. "Ah," said Hagrid. "Yeah, come in then." They had tea. The rock cakes were as bad as ever. And halfway through, Hagrid put his cup down and stared at the fire and said, "I said summat to you on the boat about that house." "You said everyone who went bad was in it," said Harry. "Yeah," said Hagrid miserably. "And I meant it, and I've been sat here a week feeling like the biggest fool in Britain, because I looked at you across that hall and I thought, well, there it is. And then I thought, Rubius Hagrid, you great sack of nothing. That's Lily's boy and he's 11 and he's on his own in a dungeon, and the first thing you did was decide about him." He blew his nose on the tea towel. "I got it wrong," said Hagrid. "You come here Saturdays, every Saturday, all year, I don't care what color your tie is." It is worth saying plainly, because the timeline turns on small things. For most of that first term, Rubius Hagrid was the only adult in Scotland who was openly kind to Harry Potter, and he had to fight himself to do it, and he did it anyway. Flying lessons were on a Thursday in late September with the Gryffindors. Everything went exactly as you remember. Neville Longbottom lost his nerve and his broom and broke his wrist. Madam Hoot marched him off to the hospital wing. Draco Malfoy picked the Remembrall out of the grass and held it up to the light and said something about leaving it in a tree for Longbottom to find. And Harry Potter, who was in Slytherin, said, "Give it here, Malfoy." That is the sentence the whole school talked about for a fortnight. Not the flying. The sentence. A Slytherin first year told Draco Malfoy to put something down in front of 20 Gryffindors on behalf of Neville Longbottom. Then Malfoy went up, and Harry went after him, and Harry caught the Remembrall a foot from the ground in a dive that made Ron Weasley shout out loud. Professor McGonagall came across the lawn like weather. Here is where the world tilts again. In the story, you know, she takes Harry away and delivers him to Oliver Wood, and Gryffindor gets a seeker. In this story, She stops halfway across the grass and stands there, and you can watch the moment on her face, because the child she is furious with is not hers to reward. She took him to the dungeons instead and knocked on Snape's door and said, in a voice like a locked box, "Severus, your first year has just caught a Rememberall in a 50-foot dive without touching the grass. He is your problem. Enjoy him." Slytherin already had a seeker. His name was Terence Higgs. He was in his 4th year. He was good, and he had waited 2 years for the position. Snape watched Harry fly for 11 minutes, gave him a broom, and dropped Higgs. So the youngest house player in a century played in green, and Terence Higgs spent the rest of the year with a grud, and half the Slytherin team decided that Potter had bought the position with his name. Nobody in that house ever gets given anything without someone deciding it was owed to them instead. Ron Weasley found him in a corridor on the 2nd floor 2 days later. "You are on their team," Ron said. It came out like an accusation. "I did not ask to be." "You did not ask to be in their house either," said Ron. "You keep saying that." He kicked the wall. "Everyone in my dorm says I should not talk to you. Seamus says Slytherins are all the same, and Percy says to be careful, and my brother Fred says he does not care as long as you are rubbish at Quidditch, which, obviously, you are not." "What do you say?" said Harry. Ron went red to the ears. "I say you gave me half your sweets on the train, and you did not laugh at my sandwiches," he said. "That is what I have got to go on. It is not much." "It is more than anybody else has got," said Harry. They shook on it in an empty corridor, like two people signing something illegal, which, socially, it was. Hermione Granger came into it sideways, and it cost her. She was insufferable that autumn, and lonely with it, and she had made the mistake of correcting Ron's wand movement in charms in front of Seamus Finnegan. Ron said the thing. It is horrible to know that some things happen in every version of the world. He said she was a nightmare, and no wonder she had no friends, and she heard it, and she ran. That evening was Halloween, and the troll came in through the dungeons. Which is the point. The Slytherin common room is under the lake. When Professor Quirrell fell through the doors, screaming about a troll in the dungeons, the house that was sent straight back down towards it was Harry's. The prefects lined them up and marched them out. Harry counted heads out of habit, saw the Gryffindor line going the other way up the marble staircase, saw a tall red-haired boy in that line, arguing with his brother and pointing back, and Harry did the thing that decided who he was going to be for the next 7 years. He stepped out of his own line and went the wrong way. Ron met him at the bottom of the stairs. "Girls' bathroom, 2nd floor," Ron said, out of breath. "She has been in there since 4. Nobody told her." You know what happens in the bathroom. The troll, the club, the sinks and splinters, Hermione under a basin with her hands over her head, Ron's Wingardium Leviosa, which he got right at last, because it mattered, the club coming down on its owner's skull. What you do not know is what happened when the teachers arrived. Professor McGonagall looked at 2 boys and 1 girl, and a great deal of destroyed plumbing, and Hermione Granger, who had never told a lie to a teacher in her life, stood up on shaking legs and said that she had gone looking for the troll on purpose because she had read about them and thought she could handle one, and that Ronald Weasley and Harry Potter had come to stop her being stupid. Snape was standing in the doorway. He said nothing at all. He was leaning on the door frame because his robe was torn at the shin, and the leg beneath it was bleeding, and Harry noticed and filed it, and drew a completely wrong conclusion from it that lasted 8 months. 5 points to Gryffindor for Hermione. 5 points to Slytherin for Harry, awarded by Professor McGonagall through her teeth. And that is the strangest friendship in the castle formed on the wrong side of a house line at the age of 11 over a broken sink. They could not sit together at meals. That is the small daily grief of this timeline, and it never goes away. They could not do homework in each other's common rooms. So they invented the library and an empty classroom on the 3rd floor with a wobbly desk. and a system of notes. And Hermione made a timetable because of course she did. November brought Quidditch, and Harry played his first match against Gryffindor. Ron sat in the stands in a scarlet scarf and did not know what to do with his face. Hermione, beside him, had a pair of borrowed binoculars and a copy of the rules. 20 minutes in, Harry's broom tried to kill him. It bucked and rolled and dragged him half off. Down in the stands, Hermione swung the binoculars along the staff benches and found Professor Snape, who had his eyes locked on Harry and was muttering without blinking. And Hermione, who was 11 and rule-bound and certain, said, "It is Snape. He is cursing his own seeker." She went along the row and under the benches with a jar of blue fire, and on the way she knocked hard into a small man in a purple turban so that he went down over a bench and lost his line of sight for about 4 seconds. 4 seconds was all it took. The broom steadied. Harry, hanging by one hand, swung back up, went into a dive that made the commentator scream, and pulled up with the snitch almost in his mouth. Slytherin won. The green half of the stadium went up like a bonfire, and for about 90 seconds, Harry Potter was carried on the shoulders of people who had not spoken to him in 8 weeks. He came down off those shoulders and found that he had liked it, and that liking it frightened him more than the broom had. That night, in Hagrid's hut, 3 children put the pieces together and got the picture completely wrong. "Snape was cursing you," said Ron. "Snape had a bitten leg," said Harry, "on Halloween." "There is a 3-headed dog on the 3rd floor standing on a trapdoor," said Hermione, "and it is guarding something." "You want to forget that dog, and you want to forget what it's guarding," said Hagrid, going purple. "That's between Professor Dumbledore and Nicholas Flamel." There is a silence in that hut that lasts about 4 seconds, and Hagrid spends it looking at the ceiling. So the term ended with a name to chase, and Harry stayed at Hogwarts for Christmas. And on Christmas morning, there was a parcel at the foot of his bed with no sender, and inside it was something that poured over his hands like water made of air. He tried it on. He walked out through the sleeping castle in the middle of the night in his father's invisibility cloak, into the restricted section and out again with a book screaming, and up a staircase he did not know, into a disused classroom with a mirror in it. The mirror was tall and gold, and there were people in it. A woman with dark red hair and green eyes, exactly like his own, put her hand up against the inside of the glass. A thin man with untidy black hair stood behind her, laughing at something, and behind them, filling the frame, going back and back, were dozens of people with his nose, his knees, his hair, and every one of them was looking at him. Harry sat on the floor in front of that mirror until the sky went grey. He went back the next night. He went back the night after that. On the 3rd night, Professor Dumbledore was sitting on a desk in the dark and had been for some time. "I see you have discovered the delights of the Mirror of Erised," he said. "It shows us the deepest, most desperate desire of our hearts, which is exactly why it has driven better men than either of us mad. It shows neither truth nor knowledge. Men have wasted away in front of it, and it is being moved tomorrow, and I must ask you not to go looking for it again." "Sir," said Harry, "what do you see?" "I see myself holding a pair of thick woolen socks," said Dumbledore. They looked at each other in the dark. Harry knew, at 11, that he had just been lied to kindly, and he did not know yet what it meant that Dumbledore had lied to him at all. And then Harry said, "Sir, when I was sorted, the hat said something to me. It said there was something in me that was not mine." That is what almost happened. What actually happened is that Harry opened his mouth to say it, and looked at the old man in the dark who had just admitted to nothing, and thought, "He decided where I sleep, and he has not spoken to me since September. And if I tell him there is something wrong inside me, what does a man like that do about it?" So he said, Nothing, sir. Good night." Dumbledore watched him go. And for the second time that year, the headmaster felt the shape of a question he was not asking and let it lie because he had a plan, and the plan needed the boy to be ordinary for a few more years. That is the mistake. Not cruelty. Never cruel. A brilliant man deciding that a difficult conversation could wait and being wrong by about 5 years. Spring was the dragon. Hagrid won a dragon egg from a stranger in a pub, hatched it in a wooden house, named it Norbert, and had it in his hut for 9 days before it set fire to his beard. Getting a Norwegian ridgeback out of Scotland took Ron's brother Charlie, a midnight trip to the tallest tower, and the invisibility cloak. It also took a mistake, coming down from the tower in the dark with the cloak folded over his arm because he was hot and tired, and 11, Harry walked straight into Professor McGonagall. He was not alone. Draco Malfoy had followed them and been caught first, and was standing there in his dressing gown, looking sick, because he had expected Harry to be expelled and had not expected to be included. 4 detentions: Harry, Hermione, Neville Longbottom, who had come to warn them and been caught for his trouble, and Draco. They served it at 11 at night in the Forbidden Forest, with Hagrid looking for a unicorn that something was killing. They found it in a clearing, silver and enormous and quite dead, with its blood lying on the leaves in pools that glowed, and a hooded shape came out of the trees on all 4s and put its mouth to the wound. Draco Malfoy screamed and ran. He was 11, and he had spent his whole life being told what his family was, and when the moment came, he found out that he was a boy who screams and runs, and it humiliated him so completely that he was still angry about it 4 years later. Harry did not run. He could not. His scar had opened like a hot wire behind his eye, and he was on his knees. Then hoofs and a centaur, and the hooded thing gliding away between the trees. "Mr. Potter," said the centaur, whose name was Firenze, "do you know what unicorn blood is used for? It will keep you alive even if you are an inch from death, but at a terrible price. You will have a half-life, a cursed life, from the moment the blood touches your lips. Who would choose that?" "Can you think of nobody?" said Firenze. "Somebody who has waited 11 years to come back. Somebody who is drinking in a forest because he cannot do it anywhere else." Harry rode out of the trees on a centaur's back and knew 3 things. Voldemort was in the forest, Voldemort wanted the stone, and Voldemort was not a story. Exams came, exams went, and then a boy in the dungeons put together a boarhound, a flute, a dragon, and a stranger in a pub who had never taken his hood down, and understood that the man who had been in that forest was going through the trapdoor tonight. They tried to tell McGonagall. She told them the stone was perfectly safe and sent them away, which is what any sane teacher does when 3 first-years bang on her door about a national treasure. So it was 3 of them, at midnight, in a corridor on the 3rd floor, with a wooden flute Hagrid had carved. The dog slept. The trapdoor opened. Devil's snare and Hermione's blue fire. Winged keys and Harry on a broom. A chessboard 40 feet across, where Ron Weasley put himself on a horse, worked out the only line that won, and let a stone queen smash him off it to make it happen. Harry knelt beside him for 3 seconds. Then Hermione dragged him on, because Ron would have been furious if he had wasted it. The riddle of the potions was Hermione's, and there was only enough of the black one for 1 person. "You go on," said Hermione. "I will go back for Ron. Harry, be careful." "You said the potion was for 1, said Harry. "So it is me. It has been me since the hat took 4 minutes." He drank and walked through the black fire. Quirrell was waiting in front of the mirror of Erised, and he was not stammering anymore. "Not Snape," said Harry. "Severus does rather look the part," said Quirrell. "He has been watching me all year. When I was cursing your broom at that match, he was 3 rows away muttering the counter curse at the same time, and your clever friend set fire to him for it. It made him look wonderfully guilty. I have been very grateful to him." He put Harry in ropes with a flick and turned back to the mirror, and could not make it give him the stone. And then the voice came. It came out of the back of Quirrell's own head, and it was thin and dry and unbearably calm. Let me speak to him, face to face. The turban came off. There was a face in the back of Quirrell's skull, chalk white, flat nostrils, red eyes. Harry Potter, it said. So, they put you in my house. Harry could not move and could not look away. Do you know what I felt when I heard? I have been in this country for a year, drinking out of dead animals, and the only good news anybody has brought me is that the hat sat you at my table. Salazar's table. Look at what they have done to you since. Your head of house humiliates you. The old man does not speak to you. Your own house sends you to Coventry for a year, and still you walk down here to save their stone. Where are my parents? Said Harry. Dead, said Voldemort, without any interest at all. Your mother chose to die. It was unnecessary, and it was sentimental. I offered her the chance to stand aside. Nobody ever mentions that, do they? I have offered before. I am offering now once, because I am in a good mood, and because they put you where you belong. Get the stone out of that mirror. Give it to me. I will bring your parents back, and you will never be lonely again. And Harry Potter, 11 years old, tied up in a cellar, felt the offer land somewhere real. That is the honest part. He wanted his mother. He had spent 3 nights in front of a mirror because he wanted his mother. It was not nothing. You are a liar, he said. You cannot bring back the dead. If you could, you would have brought yourself back years ago and not been living in the back of somebody's head. The face contorted. Seize him! Quirrell's hand closed on Harry's wrist, and Quirrell began to scream because the skin of his fingers was blistering and cracking where it touched. Harry did not know why. He only knew it worked. He got both hands onto Quirrell's face and held on, while a man burned to ash under his palms. And that is a thing an 11-year-old should never have to know he can do. And Harry knew it for the rest of his life. The last thing he heard before he passed out was the voice going past him and through him and out of the room, unhurried, without any anger left in it at all. I asked you once, Harry Potter. Remember that I asked you once. I do not intend to ask again. He woke 3 days later in the hospital wing under a small mountain of sweets. Dumbledore was sitting beside the bed, and this time he did not leave. The stone has been destroyed, he said. Nicholas and his wife have enough elixir left to set their affairs in order, and then they will die. To a well-organized mind, death is simply the next great adventure. Also, you have been unconscious for 3 days, and Mr. Weasley and Miss Granger have been unbearable. Sir, said Harry, why could Quirrell not touch me? Because your mother died to save you, said Dumbledore. That kind of love leaves its own mark, not a scar, something in your skin. Quirrell, so full of hatred and greed, could not bear to touch a person carrying it. It was agony to him. Harry lay and looked at the ceiling. Then he said, Sir, the hat took 4 minutes. It did. Everyone says the hat listens if you ask. I asked. I begged it, and it put me there anyway. Dumbledore was quiet for a while. Outside, an owl went past the window. Then I think, he said carefully, that the hat saw something in you that it judged more important than your preference. That is not an insult. Harry, hats are not sentimental, and Slytherin house is not a curse. It has produced cruelty, yes. It has also produced people who kept promises when it was expensive, and who thought 3 moves ahead when everybody else was shouting. You are not going to ask me what it saw, said Harry. And there it was. The door opened for 1 second. Not tonight, said Dumbledore gently. Tonight you should sleep. You are 11. He would have given a great deal later to have that second back. The leaving feast was hung in green and silver, because Slytherin had won the House Cup 7 years running and had won it again, and the whole hall knew it before they walked in. Then Dumbledore stood up and started awarding last-minute points, and the hall began to make a noise like a kettle. 50 points to Gryffindor for Ronald Weasley, for the best-played game of chess Hogwarts had seen in many years. 50 points to Gryffindor for Hermione Granger, for cool logic in the face of fire. 10 points to Gryffindor for Neville Longbottom, because it takes a great deal of bravery to stand up to your enemies, and a very particular kind to stand up to your friends. And then he stopped and looked down the hall at the green table. And 60 points to Slytherin House, said Albus Dumbledore, for Harry Potter, for pure nerve and for outstanding courage. Do the arithmetic, because the whole hall did it in about 2 seconds. Slytherin kept the cup. Slytherin kept the cup by a margin that Harry Potter had personally provided. In a year in which Slytherin House had sent him to Coventry, put a dead frog in his bed, and let a fourth-year hex his shoelaces on the stairs. Nobody cheered for a moment. Then Marcus Flint stood up and started clapping, because he was captain and he was not stupid. And then the whole green table was on its feet roaring, and Draco Malfoy was clapping with his jaw clenched so tight it hurt. And up at the Gryffindor table, Ron Weasley was standing on the bench applauding a Slytherin with both arms above his head, while his brothers stared at him. Harry sat in the middle of it and did not feel triumphant. He felt bought. That is year 1. He went back to Privet Drive with a trunk, an owl, and a sentence he had not repeated to anybody. 6 more years to go, and the thing under the lake had only just started to want him. The house elf turned up in his bedroom in July. "Dobby has come to protect Harry Potter," it said, ringing a pillowcase. "Even if he must shut Harry Potter's fingers in the oven door. Harry Potter must not go back to Hogwarts this year. There is a plot. Terrible things are going to happen." "What plot? Who is making it?" Dobby began hitting himself with the lamp. Here is the joke this timeline plays, and it is a cruel one. Dobby could not name his master's family. He had come to save the boy from a plan being made in a study 40 miles away, and the boy he came to save shared a dormitory with that family's son. Dobby was standing in a muggle bedroom, begging Harry Potter to stay away from the one house in Britain where the plot lived 9 months of the year, and Harry was going to go back and sleep 4 beds down from it. Dobby dropped a pudding on a guest, got Harry a warning letter from the ministry, and vanished. Bars went up over the window. Ron Weasley took them off with a flying car at 1 in the morning. That is the important thing about that summer, and it is worth saying slowly. A pure-blood Gryffindor from a family the Slytherins called blood traitors stole his father's car, drove it 300 miles in the dark, and broke a Slytherin out of a muggle house because his letters had stopped and he was worried. The Weasleys fed him for 4 weeks. Mrs. Weasley made him a jumper at Christmas with an H on it. Percy disapproved of him formally, twice. The twins asked him for professional advice on how to get into the Slytherin common room, purely hypothetically. And Ginny Weasley, who was about to turn 11 and start at Hogwarts in September, could not get a single word out in front of him and knocked her porridge into her lap twice, because he was the first famous person who had ever sat at her breakfast table. Then Dobby sealed the barrier at King's Cross, and 2 boys with a trolley hit solid brick in front of 100 muggles, and Ron said the words that shaped the next 9 months of their lives. The car. They crashed it into the Whomping Willow at dusk in front of the castle, and were still sitting in the wreck when Professor Snape opened the passenger door. The lecture happened in the dungeon with mud on the floor. "You were seen," said Snape, "by 7 muggles. You have destroyed a tree that has been here longer than I have. You have broken the international statute of secrecy on the first evening of term. And you, Potter, have done it wearing my colors." Then Dumbledore arrived, and Professor McGonagall, and Harry watched something he never forgot. Snape wanted Harry expelled and pushed for it and lost. And when the punishment came down, it was not expulsion. It was letters home and detention. Harry got his detention with Professor Lockhart, signing photographs of Lockhart's own face until 2 in the morning. What Harry did not see was Snape afterwards, going quietly through the wreckage of the car and the churned ground under the willow, checking twice for blood. Gilderoy Lockhart was the new defense teacher. He released a cage of Cornish pixies in his first lesson and left the room. He wrote his own name on the blackboard with a flourish and asked the class what his favorite color was. He was, in fairness, the only teacher in the castle who treated Harry exactly the same as everybody else, because Gilderoy Lockhart did not really believe that anyone else in the room existed. And on Halloween, the writing appeared on the wall. The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware. Mrs. Norris hung stiff from a torch bracket underneath it, and the whole school was in the corridor, and standing directly under the message, closest to the wall, in green and silver, was Harry Potter. You can hear the noise the school made. You can hear it building over the next 3 days in the corridors and the courtyards, and the queue outside the greenhouses. There is a monster in the school. It goes after the Muggle-born. The last time it happened, a girl died 50 years ago, and the boy standing under the message was a Slytherin. In the world you know, it took a dueling club and a snake to turn Hogwarts against Harry Potter. In this world, it took Halloween. The dueling club still came. Lockhart on a golden stage, Snape as his demonstration partner, and Snape disarming him across the length of the hall in 1 second flat, which the entire school enjoyed enormously. Then Snape paired Harry with Draco Malfoy. Draco was quick that day. He shouted the snake spell, and a long black serpent came out of his wand and landed between them and reared at a boy in the front row, a Hufflepuff called Justin Finch Fletchley. Harry told it to stop. That is what he heard himself say. Stop. Leave him. He said it the way you shout at a dog. And the snake dropped flat on the flagstones and turned its head to him and waited for the next instruction, and the hall had gone so quiet that Harry could hear the candles. He had not spoken English. He had been hissing. Justin Finch Fletchley backed away with his hands up. Somebody at the back said the word Parselmouth, and 150 faces did the same arithmetic at the same time. Salazar Slytherin talked to snakes. The heir of Slytherin has opened the chamber. The boy in green just talked to a snake in front of everybody. 2 things happened in the next week, and one of them nobody expects. The first is what you would guess. Hogwarts turned on him. Hufflepuffs walked the long way round. Ravenclaws stopped talking when he sat down. Justin Finch Fletchley was found petrified in a corridor beside nearly headless Nick, and Colin Creevey was already in the hospital wing, and the whole castle decided the case was closed. The second is the part that mattered. Harry got followers, not friends. Followers? He came down to the common room, and there was a 4th year in his chair who stood up when he arrived. 2nd years started saying good morning. Terence Higgs, who had hated him for a year over a Quidditch place, held a door, and a group of them began walking 2 steps behind Harry between lessons, which he did not ask for and could not shake off, and which looked exactly like a court. "They think you did it," said Blaise Zabini one evening, from behind a book. "Some of them are frightened of you, some of them are pleased. Rather, a lot of them are hoping you will tell them who is next." Draco Malfoy sat by the green window and said nothing for a week, and then cracked. "It should have been me," he said, in the dormitory, in the dark. When he thought Harry was asleep, he was not talking to Harry. He was talking to the ceiling, and his voice was wet. "My father says the chamber was opened before. He says the family that opens it is the family that matters, and it is you. It is always you." Harry lay still and learned more about Draco Malfoy in 10 seconds than he had learned in 15 months. So the trio made a plan. In another world, the plan is Polyjuice Potion, so that Harry and Ron can walk into the Slytherin common room disguised as Crabbe and Goyle and question Draco. In this world, Harry already lives there, and Hermione Granger came up with something far more dangerous. "They think you are the heir," she said, in the empty classroom with the wobbly desk. "So be the heir. Let them think it. If the real one believes you are a rival, he does something. If he believes you are an ally, he tells you something. Either way he moves." "That is the worst idea you have ever had," said Ron. "Yes," said Hermione. "That is why it will work." For 3 weeks, Harry Potter did not deny anything. He let sentences hang. He looked at people over the top of a book. He said once, in a corridor loud enough for a prefect, that some things were nobody's business but Salazar's. He hated every minute of it, and he was frighteningly good at it, which he also hated. And it worked exactly the way Hermione said, and then it destroyed everything exactly the way she had not thought through. Because the real heir was not a rival and was not an ally and was not a person at the time. The real heir was a black diary with a hollow spine and a girl in her first year who had been writing in it since September, and the thing inside that book was reading the school through her eyes. And what it saw, that winter, was the best gift it had ever been given. It saw Harry Potter openly playing at being the heir of Slytherin. So it stopped hiding. Ginny Weasley woke with feathers on her robes and paint on her hands, and no memory of the night, and every time she tried to tell somebody, she found herself standing in the corridor already, with the words gone. In February, Hermione Granger did not come to the library. They found out from Ron's brother Percy. 2 more attacks, a Ravenclaw prefect called Penelope Clearwater, and a second-year Gryffindor, both petrified in a corridor near the library at 4 in the afternoon, both carrying a small round mirror. Harry got into the hospital wing that night under the cloak. Hermione was lying on the bed with her eyes open and her hand up in front of her face. He sat with her for an hour. He talked to her about nothing, and when he finally took her stiff fingers to move her hand out of her own line of sight, a crumpled page came out of them, a page torn from a library book with one word written on the margin in her handwriting: pipes. Now, the part that this timeline does to Harry, that no other timeline does. The school did not go quiet with fear. It went loud with certainty. Everyone knew the Slytherin boy who talked to snakes and had spent a month letting people think he was the heir, had just petrified the best student in the year, and that the best student in the year was Muggle-born, and that she had been his friend, which made it worse and better and more interesting. Ron Weasley punched a 6th-year Ravenclaw in the face for saying it out loud. That is not something he ever mentioned afterwards. The governors suspended Dumbledore. Hagrid was taken to Azkaban on an old charge from 50 years ago with a raincoat over his head, and on his way out he said loudly, to nobody at all, that if anybody wanted to know anything, they would only have to follow the spiders. Ron went white. Ron hated spiders. Ron went anyway. The forest gave them an enormous blind acromantula, who told them that the beast in the castle was the thing his kind feared above all, that it lived in the pipes, and that the girl who died 50 years ago had died in a bathroom. Then his children tried to eat them, and the flying car came out of the trees like a mad dog and saved their lives, which is the only reason either of them saw the summer. A bathroom. A ghost called Moaning Myrtle, who had died in one 50 years ago, complaining about a pair of great big eyes by the sink. And in the flooded bathroom on the first floor, Harry found the diary, because Ginny Weasley had tried to get rid of it there and someone else had fished it out, and Myrtle had thrown it back through a wall. He wrote in it, it wrote back. Then it took him. Tom Riddle was 16 years old, tall and handsome and slightly transparent, and he showed Harry a memory of a boy exactly like himself handing Rubeus Hagrid to the authorities for a crime he had not committed. Harry came out of the diary, certain he had solved it and completely wrong about what he was holding. And in the small hours, the diary wrote to him one last time. Not a memory, a conversation. "I have been watching you all year," it wrote. "You wear my colors. You speak my language. Your own house was afraid of you, and then it followed you, and you did not even have to work for it. They put you at my table, Harry. The last 3 weeks were fast and terrible. The writing on the wall came back, and this time it named a person. Her skeleton will lie in the chamber forever. Professor McGonagall read out the name Ginevra Weasley in the staff room, and Ron Weasley made a sound in the corridor outside that Harry never forgot. Lockhart was appointed to save her and was found packing. So it was 2 boys and a fraud in the flooded bathroom in front of a tap with a snake scratched on it. Harry told it to open. It heard him. Lockhart tried to wipe their memories with Ron's broken wand and blew half the tunnel down on himself instead. And when the dust cleared, there was a wall of rock between Harry and the only 2 people he could shout for. "Wait there," said Ron through the rubble. "I will start moving stones. Harry, do not be brave and stupid. Be the other thing. Be clever." So Harry Potter walked the last quarter mile of that tunnel alone. Ginny Weasley was lying on wet stone in the middle of a hall of pillars carved into snakes, with her hair spread out and her face like paper. And a tall boy in old-fashioned robes was standing over her, watching Harry come. "She would not stop writing," said Tom Riddle. "It is very boring listening to an 11-year-old. But she poured her soul into that book, and her soul is exactly what I needed. She is going, and I am coming back. There is very little left of her now." Harry went for his wand, and the wand went out of his hand. "I want to talk to you," said Riddle. "I have wanted to talk to you all year. How does a baby with no talent at all defeat the greatest wizard who ever lived? Because there are only 2 possibilities. Either you are something, or he was less than I remember, and I do not like the second one." "He was a man called Tom," said Harry. Riddle's face did not move, but the air did. "I made a better name," he said, and he wrote it in fire on the black air. "Tom Marvolo Riddle." Then he waved his hand, and the letters rearranged themselves into "I am Lord Voldemort." "And you," he said, "are the boy they sat at my table. Do you know what I felt when I read it out of her? 50 years I have been a book. 50 years, and the first news out of the castle is that the child who ruined me sleeps in my house, gets bullied by my house, wins the house cup for my house, and is despised by every teacher who counts. I could use you, not as a servant. Salazar's blood does not run in you, but something of mine does, and we both know it." The hat knew it. Harry went cold, and Riddle saw it, and Riddle smiled, because he had guessed and been right. "Oh," he said softly. "It told you, did it? Poor boy." Then he turned to the great stone face at the end of the hall and hissed, and the basilisk came out of the statue's mouth. "You know the fight, the blind snake, because Fawkes the Phoenix came down the pipes in a rush of flame and took its eyes out, the old hat that fell out of the air and landed in Harry's hands, and the weight in it, and a silver sword with rubies in the grip. But stop here for 1 second, because this is the exact center of our entire story. Only a true Gryffindor could pull that sword out of that hat. And a Slytherin was holding it." Harry went up the fallen pillar and rammed the sword through the roof of the basilisk's mouth. And a fang went through his arm as it died, and he sat down against the wall with a hole in his elbow and poison in his blood. And Riddle stood over him and told him it would take 5 minutes. Fawkes cried into the wound. Phoenix tears heal. That is a fact any second year knows, and nobody remembers at the right moment. And Riddle, screaming, went for the sword, and Harry got there first with the basilisk fang and drove it through the diary. Ink came out of it like blood. Riddle came apart from the inside, and the hall filled with a scream that was not a boy's scream at all. And then he was gone, and there was a girl coughing and crying on the stones. Up in the office, later, with the hat on its shelf and Fawkes on his perch and Ginny gone to bed, Harry asked the only question he cared about. "Sir, it was the Gryffindor sword." "It was. I am not one. Dumbledore turned the sword over in his hands and looked at the name below the hilt. Godric Gryffindor did not put his courage in that blade for members of a club, he said. The hat has one rule about the sword, and the rule is not about houses. It gives it to someone who needs it and who is not asking for it for themselves. You went down there for Ronald's sister, alone, with a fraud and a broken wand, and you did not ask for a weapon. That is the whole test. You passed it in a corridor before you ever touched the hat. He said something to me down there, said Harry. Riddle. He said I had something of his in me, and sir, when I was sorted, the hat said. He stopped. He was 12. He had just been poisoned and burned, and told by a memory of Lord Voldemort that they were alike. And the old man in front of him was looking at him with such careful, gentle attention that Harry suddenly understood that if he said the sentence out loud, it would be real and it would be true, and then he would have to live inside it. It said I would do well in Slytherin. Harry finished. That is all. Dumbledore let him go. We are 2 years in. He has now had 2 chances to say it and taken neither, and there are 5 years left, and by the time he says it, this old man will be dead. There is one last thing about that night. Lucius Malfoy came storming into the office with a house elf trotting behind him because Dobby's master had heard that Ginny Weasley was alive and that a diary had been destroyed. Harry looked at the elf and at the ruined book and at the man and did the arithmetic in front of him. You gave it to her, said Harry. In the shop, in the summer, you put it in her cauldron. Prove it, said Lucius Malfoy. He could not. Instead, Harry took the diary and pushed a sock into it and gave the whole ruined thing to Lucius Malfoy with a bow, and Lucius threw it aside in disgust, and Dobby caught a sock in midair and was free. Master has given Dobby clothes, the elf whispered. Lucius Malfoy went for his wand. Dobby knocked him down the corridor with one snap of his fingers. And that is the story of how the boy who had been ignored by his own house for 2 years made a permanent enemy of the richest man in it and gained a friend who would eventually die for him. Draco Malfoy did not speak to Harry for the whole of the train journey home. He sat in the corner of the compartment with his arms folded and his father's failure sitting between them like a third passenger. And when they got to King's Cross, he stood up and said one thing. He hit an elf, said Draco, in front of Dumbledore. He never used to be that stupid. Then he got off the train and did not look back. And something in this timeline had started to move that would not finish for 4 more years. Sirius Black got out of Azkaban in the summer of 1993, and Harry Potter heard about it from a Muggle television in a house on Privet Drive 3 days after blowing up his uncle's sister and running away with a trunk. The night bus took him to Diagon Alley. The Minister for Magic himself came to meet him, did not punish him, and put him in a room above a pub with a strong hint that he should not go wandering. Nobody explained why. Harry had 2 weeks of the best summer of his life and a small cold suspicion underneath it, and both of those things were true at once. On the 1st of September, the Hogwarts Express stopped in the rain and the lamps went out, and something came down the corridor that made the windows crust with ice. The Dementor got as far as opening the compartment door before a shabby man in a patched coat drove it back with a spell and a lump of silver light. Harry heard a woman screaming somewhere very far away, and then he was on the floor. The shabby man gave him chocolate and told him his name was Remus Lupin, and looked at Harry's tie and then at his face for slightly too long. That look is worth explaining. Remus Lupin had come to Hogwarts prepared to see James Potter's son in scarlet at the Gryffindor table in the seat where he had sat with the boy's father. Instead, he watched Harry Potter walk to the far side of the hall and sit down under the green banners, and Remus Lupin, who had spent his whole life being judged for something he had not chosen, was ashamed of how much it hurt him. He was also the best teacher in the castle, and he proved it in his 3rd lesson. the boggart came out of the wardrobe and became a Dementor, and it was Harry it went for, and Lupin stepped in front of it before the cold got past Harry's ribs. Afterwards, in the empty room, he asked why. "Because I hear my mother," said Harry. "When they come near me, I hear her dying. That is what is in my head. That is what everybody in my house says about me anyway. Potter is famous because his mother died. Who says that?" "Everyone," said Harry. "The ones who are polite say it quietly." Lupin sat down on a desk, and then he told Harry Potter what the Patronus charm was, and offered to teach him, and thereby handed a 13-year-old the one weapon that eventually saved his own life and about a dozen others. Meanwhile, the school was full of serious black. In the Gryffindor common room, they talked about him with horror. He had been the Potters' friend, he had sold them, and now he had come for their son. In the Slytherin common room, they talked about him with something much worse. They talked about him with family knowledge. "He was a black," said a 7th year, over a game of cards. "Ancient house, oldest blood in the country, sorted Gryffindor at 11, which broke his mother, and then he ran off to live with the Potters like a stray. Then he grew up and remembered what he was. His cousin is in Azkaban," said Millicent Bulstrode. "His other cousin was disowned for marrying a Muggle-born. My mother says the blacks always crack one way or the other." Draco Malfoy said, "He is my cousin, actually. Second cousin, my mother's family." And he said it, looking straight at Harry, in front of everybody. "You do know what he did, do you not, Potter? Everybody keeps not telling you. It is quite funny." Harry did not ask him. He went to the person who was obliged to answer him, which was his head of house. And he did it at 7 in the morning outside the potion store, and he asked flat out. Snape looked at him for a long moment. And then he did something Harry did not expect and did not appreciate for another 4 years. He told him the truth, coldly, all of it, in about 90 seconds, without decorating it. "Your parents were hidden by the Fidelius charm. The location of their house was sealed inside one person. Only that person could give it away, and only by choosing to. That person was Sirius Black. He was your father's closest friend. He was made their secret keeper. And 8 days later, the Dark Lord walked up the front path. Black was arrested in the street with 12 dead muggles around him and one finger of Peter Pettigrew on the ground. He laughed when they took him. Why did nobody tell me? Because they think you are a child, said Snape. You are, Potter, but you are a child in my house, and you will be told things in my house, because half of the people in it already know. Then he added, and this cost him something. You will keep to the castle. You will not go into Hogsmeade. If Black is coming for you, he will not come through the front doors. Harry went to Hogsmeade twice, obviously, under his father's cloak. That is the year of the Patronus lessons. Lupin in the empty history classroom with a boggart in a crate, and Harry falling over and getting up and falling over, and a wisp of silver, and then a shape, and then, in March, a full stag standing in the middle of the room with its head down. Prongs, said Lupin, and turned away and did not explain. It is also the year Harry got a firebolt in the post with no sender, and the year Hermione Granger reported it to a teacher because she was frightened it was cursed and could not bear to be right about the wrong thing quietly. Harry did not speak to her for a month. Ron did not speak to her for longer, over a rat and a cat. Nobody in that friendship covered themselves in glory in 1994. And it is the year Slytherin lost the Quidditch Cup while winning every match because in the last game of the season, Harry Potter went up against Cho Chang in a headwind and caught the snitch after 9 minutes. Slytherin needed to win that match by 200 points to take the cup on aggregate. They won it by 170. The captain did not speak to Harry for a fortnight, and Harry could not honestly argue with him. Then came June, and the shrieking shack. An enormous black dog dragged Ron Weasley through a gap in the roots of the Whomping Willow with his leg broken. Harry and Hermione went in after him, up through a tunnel, into a boarded-up house. And the dog was not a dog. The man in the room was grey and starved, and looked like something that had been left out in the rain for 12 years. And he was staring at Ron's pocket like a wolf at a door. You know the truth of that night. The rat was Peter Pettigrew. Pettigrew was the secret keeper, swapped at the last minute because Sirius thought it was cleverer. And it was the cleverest thing he ever thought of, and it killed his friends. Pettigrew murdered 12 people in a street, cut off his own finger, and spent 12 years asleep in a boy's bed as a family pet. Lupin came through the door and did not disarm his old friend. He embraced him, and then the two of them explained it, and Sirius Black got his hands round a rat's throat and Harry Potter said stop. But there is one moment in that shack that only exists in this timeline, and it is the reason Harry believed him. Because when the light first hit Harry's face and Sirius Black saw him properly, the first thing Sirius saw was the color of his tie. He recoiled. Actually recoiled, staggered a step backwards into the wall, with his mouth open. No, he said. No, they would not. They would not put you there. Nice to meet you too, said Harry. You do not understand. Sirius Black's hands were shaking. I got out of that family. I ran away from it when I was 16. I ran to your father's house and his mother made up a bed and never asked. And every single thing I have ever hated in my life had that crest on it. And they gave you to them. 12 years I have been looking at your picture in my head, and it was... He stopped. He looked at Harry, and Harry looked back, and the silence went on far too long. Say the rest of it, said Harry. And Sirius Black, who was not a good man that night, who was starved and half mad, and had been rehearsing one conversation for 12 years, said, I have nothing to say. I got it wrong. I am sorry. Then he sat down on the broken bed and put his face in his hands. Your mother would have laughed at me, he said. She would have taken one look at my face just now and been merciless. She was the only person alive who could tell me I was being an idiot in a way that made me want to be better. That was the moment Harry decided to trust him, not the story about Pettigrew. That, a man who was ashamed of himself in front of a stranger. Then Sirius offered him a home, which is the cruelest offer in this whole story, because it was real for about 11 minutes. They went out through the tunnel with Pettigrew in chains between Lupin and Ron, and the clouds moved off the moon. Remus Lupin had not taken his potion that evening. He transformed in front of them on the grass, and Sirius Black changed into a dog and threw himself at his oldest friend to keep him off 3 children. And in the confusion, Peter Pettigrew found his own wand, hand free, became a rat and went into the long grass. That is the whole tragedy of the 3rd year in one sentence. The one witness who could clear Sirius Black escaped because the moon came out 4 minutes early. The Dementors came for Sirius by the lake, and Harry could not hold the Patronus. What saved them was a figure on the far bank, casting a stag that drove 100 Dementors back across the water, and Harry thought it was his father, and it was not. It was himself an hour later, going round on a time-turner with Hermione Granger, saving his own life because he had already seen it done, and therefore knew that it could be. They cut Sirius Black loose from a tower window on a stolen hippogriff at midnight. There is a great deal I want to say to you, said Sirius from the back of Buckbeak. Most of it will keep. Harry, the hat put you somewhere. It does not get to say what you do there. Then he was gone, into the dark, still a wanted man, still the most hunted person in Britain. And Harry Potter went back down the stairs, having been offered a family and had it taken away in the same night. Snape found out at breakfast that Sirius Black had escaped from a locked room in his castle while 3 13-year-olds happened to be nearby, and he came very close, that morning, to saying something in front of everyone that would have ended his own usefulness in the war. He looked down the Slytherin table at Harry Potter. Harry looked back and did not blink. Neither of them said a word, and both of them understood the arrangement perfectly. And it held for another 2 years. The Quidditch World Cup was in August, and the Weasleys took him. He watched Ireland win and Victor Crumb catch the snitch anyway. And then at 2 in the morning, the tents caught fire, and a crowd of masked men in hoods came across the campsite, floating a Muggle family upside down above their heads for entertainment. Harry saw Lucius Malfoy at breakfast the next day, unmasked, unarrested, and perfectly calm. And a green skull with a snake for a tongue hung over the wood, and every adult in that field went white, because it had not been seen in 13 years. The Slytherin common room, that September, was not what you would expect. It was not gleeful. It was frightened, and it was split. And for the first time, Harry could see the seam. There were the ones whose parents had been at the campsite. There were the ones whose parents had paid fines in 1982 and rebuilt their names and did not want any of it back. And there was Daphne Greengrass, who cornered Harry by the window on the second evening of term and said quietly, "My father says the mark in the sky was a message and not a party. He says the people who put it up were telling the people who did not turn up that they had been counted. I have a sister 2 years below me in this house. Do you understand what I am telling you?" "I think so," said Harry. "Then remember I said it first," said Daphne, "when it matters." Then Dumbledore announced the Triwizard Tournament, and the Goblet of Fire, and the age line, and a school full of teenagers spent 6 weeks trying to get round it. The goblet named Victor Crumb for Durmstrang, and Fleur Delacour for Beauxbaton, and Cedric Diggory for Hogwarts, and then it went red again, and spat out a fourth piece of parchment, and Dumbledore read the name, Harry Potter. Now watch what happens to a castle. In the world, you know, 3 houses turn on Harry for stealing Cedric Diggory's moment, and Slytherin makes badges that flash the words "Potter stinks," and Harry is alone, except for Hermione. In this world, the Slytherin table stood up. They stood up and roared, and they went on roaring, while the other 3 tables sat in absolute silence and watched them do it. And something happened in that hall in 10 seconds that no essay could have achieved in 10 years. Slytherin House finally, completely claimed him. 2 weeks later, the badges came out. They were made by a 5th-year Hufflepuff, and they said, "Support Cedric Diggory, the real Hogwarts champion." And when you pressed them, they changed to "Potter stinks." Half of Gryffindor wore them. Ravenclaw wore them. Hufflepuff wore them like a uniform. And Slytherin House, top to bottom, wore green rosettes with a lightning bolt on them, and they were selling them in the entrance hall for 2 sickles, and Blaise Zabini was taking a cut. Harry Potter, aged 14, discovered that being adored is a great deal more dangerous than being hated, because being hated does not tempt you. Ron Weasley did not wear a badge. Ron Weasley did something worse. He stopped talking. "You could have told me," he said, in the corridor outside the Great Hall, with his ears burning. "You put your name in, and you did not even tell me." "I did not put my name in." "Right," said Ron. "Sure. You never do you? You never ask for any of it, and it just keeps arriving. The house that hated you loves you now. There is a rosette with your face on it. My mother sent me dress robes with lace on the collar." They did not speak for 6 weeks. Hermione carried notes between them like a diplomat with a headache and told them both at different times and with total accuracy that they were being ridiculous. The first task was dragons. Harry found out the night before because Hagrid showed him, and because Professor Karkaroff was already sneaking round the paddock, and because Cedric Diggory had not been told. So Harry found Cedric on a staircase and told him. And Cedric said, "Why?" "Because Karkaroff knows and Madame Maxime knows, and it is not a tournament if it is not fair," said Harry. Cedric Diggory looked at the green tie and said, "People have been saying things about you all term. I have not been stopping them. I'm sorry about that. Remember, Cedric, we do not have him for much longer." Harry summoned his firebolt, and out flew a Hungarian horntail, and got the highest score of the 4, and the stands went green and gold and scarlet all at once. because a whole school changes its mind very fast when it sees a 14-year-old do something impossible. Then Ron Weasley was waiting in the tent, looking at the floor. "Whoever put your name in that goblet," said Ron, "is trying to get you killed." "Yes," said Harry. "Right," said Ron. "Then I am an idiot." That is the entire apology. It was enough. It always was with them. At Christmas, there was a ball, because the tournament came with one, and every champion had to open the dancing. Harry got through it with the help of Parvati Patil, who was extremely kind about his feet, and he spent the rest of the evening on the steps with Ron, eating small sandwiches and watching the headmaster of Durmstrang argue with the headmaster of Hogwarts in a rose garden. Professor Karkaroff had his sleeve pushed up and there was something on his forearm, and he was very frightened. Harry told Sirius about it in a letter. Sirius, who was living in a cave in Scotland eating rats and reading Harry's post like a man reading the only book in the world, wrote back and told him what a Death Eater's mark looked like and what it meant when it started to darken. The second task was the lake. Harry got gillyweed from a house elf in the kitchens, breathed underwater for an hour, and would not leave a 9-year-old French girl tied to the weeds when nobody came for her. He finished last and was given second place for what the judges called outstanding moral fiber, which the Slytherin table found completely hilarious and never let him forget. And in the middle of all of it, there was Alastair Moody, the new defense teacher with a walking stick and a spinning blue eye, who was the only adult in the castle who paid Harry consistent, generous attention. He gave him hints, he gave him warnings, he gave him the idea for the summoning charm before the dragons, and a hint about the egg, and a rumor about the maze. Everybody assumed it was because Moody was an old Auror who hated dark families and was watching over the Potter boy in a nest of snakes. Everybody was wrong by exactly 180 degrees. The third task was in June at dusk in a hedge maze, 20 feet high. Harry went in second. He passed a boggart and a golden mist that turned the world upside down and a blast-ended screw. He heard Fleur scream somewhere to his left. He found Victor Crumb with his eyes blank, standing over Cedric Diggory with his wand up, and stunned him because whatever else was happening, that was not a duel. And then Cedric Diggory and Harry Potter came round the last corner at the same moment and saw the Triwizard Cup sitting on a plinth in a clearing, glowing blue. An acromantula came out of the hedge and took Harry's leg out from under him. Cedric could have run for the cup. Cedric turned round and blasted the spider off him instead. They stood there in the dark, both bleeding, 3 meters from the end of the tournament. "You take it," said Cedric. "You saved me twice tonight." "You told me about the egg," said Harry. "And I told you about the dragons. Take it together. 2 Hogwarts champions. Nobody has ever done that." Cedric Diggory laughed and said, "All right," and they walked forward and put their hands on the cup at the same second. And it was a portkey. The hook behind the navel, the roaring, the ground coming up. They landed hard in long grass in the dark, among leaning headstones, in a graveyard beside a hill with a big house on it. "Harry," said Cedric, "where are we?" A short figure came towards them out of the yews, carrying something like a baby in a bundle, and a voice like a knife said, "Kill the spare." There was a flash of green light. Cedric Diggory was 17 years old, and it took less than a second. Then Peter Pettigrew tied Harry to a headstone and cut his arm with a silver knife, and put Harry's blood into a cauldron with bone from the grave beneath his feet, and a hand he cut off his own wrist. And Lord Voldemort came out of the steam and stood up, thin and white, with red eyes and no nose, and stretched. He called the Death Eaters. They came, one by one, and knelt in a circle, and he walked around them naming their failures. Then he came back to Harry. "They tell me," said Voldemort, "that you sleep in my dungeon." Harry did not answer. His scar was blinding him. "Lucius here has a son in your year. He writes home. So does the Knot boy. I have had 4 years of reports about you from my own people's children. which is an experience I did not expect to enjoy. You wear my colors, you speak my language, you won them the cup at 11. He tilted his head. Do you remember what I said to you in that cellar? Harry made himself say it. You said you would not ask twice. I always keep the small promises, said Voldemort. It is how people learn to believe the large ones. So I will not ask you tonight, Harry Potter. I'm going to kill you in front of my friends. And then I'm going to tell everybody in Britain that you were mine. That the boy who lived, slept under Salazar's lake for 4 years, and came home to me at the end. You have spent 4 years being told you belong to me by every teacher, every newspaper, every child in that castle. When you are dead, nobody will contradict it. That is the difference. In this world, Voldemort does not need Harry Potter to be a martyr or a monster. He can make him a recruitment poster. He gave Harry his wand back because he wanted an audience. They bowed. They duelled. And when the green light and the red light met in the air between them, the two wands locked, and a thread of golden light came up out of the join and made a cage of song around them both. Their wand cores were feathers from the same phoenix. Harry did not know that yet. Voldemort did, and it was the only thing that night that frightened him. The wands fought. Voldemort's wand shuddered and began to give up its last spells backwards, and shapes came out of the tip. An old man, a muggle woman, Bertha Jorkins, Cedric Diggory, standing up straight, saying, "Take my body back, will you? Take me back to my father." And then, a woman with dark red hair who told him to hold on just a little longer, and a man with untidy black hair who told him that when the connection broke, they would give him time and to run. Harry broke the connection, dived, seized Cedric's body by the wrist, and summoned the cup. He landed on the grass at the edge of the maze, with a dead boy in his arms, in front of the whole school, with the band still playing. Nobody had told the band to stop. Alastor Moody took Harry out of the crowd, up to his office, and asked him what the Dark Lord had said, and how it had felt, and whether Harry had been afraid. Then he asked whether it had hurt when the blood was taken, and Harry realized far too late that he had never told anybody about the blood. The real Alastor Moody had been at the bottom of a trunk in that office since August. The man teaching defense against the dark arts was Bartemius Crouch Jr., a Death Eater who had escaped Azkaban years before, and every helpful hint all year had been a hand steering a boy through a maze towards a portkey. Dumbledore came through the door and blew it off its hinges before the curse left Crouch's wand. The Minister for Magic refused to believe any of it. Cornelius Fudge stood in the hospital wing and said that a mad Death Eater's confession under Veritaserum proved nothing, that Harry Potter was a disturbed boy who had seen a friend die, and, when he was tired enough to be honest, that some people had been asking for 4 years what exactly a Potter was doing in Slytherin house, and that perhaps they had been on to something. That was the moment the war started. Not the graveyard. A frightened politician in a hospital wing choosing which story was cheaper. Dumbledore stood up in the great hall at the leaving feast and told 1,500 people that Cedric Diggory had been murdered by Lord Voldemort, and that they should remember him, and that in the months and years ahead, the choice between what is right and what is easy was going to be put to every single person in that room. Then he looked at the green table for 2 full seconds and said, "Differences of habit and language are nothing at all if our aims are identical and our hearts are open. Every one of you is welcome in this hall. Every one of you is watched by somebody who wants you for something. Choose carefully who that is." Harry Potter spent that summer in a garden in Surrey, listening to the news, waiting for a war that the newspapers said was not happening. The Daily Prophet had found its line by August, and it was worse than calling him a liar. They called him a Slytherin. Every article carried it, the boy who lived of Slytherin House. Mr. Potter, who was placed by the Sorting Hat in the house of Salazar Slytherin. A source close to the school says that Potter has been able to speak Parseltongue since the age of 12. It was never quite an accusation. It never had to be. Two Dementors came down a Muggle alley in Little Whinging in August, and Harry drove them off with a stag patronus in front of his cousin. And the Ministry tried to expel him for it, and he was tried in a courtroom in front of the full Wizengamot for underage magic in a Muggle area. He was cleared because Arabella Figg testified, and because Albus Dumbledore walked into the room and dismantled the proceedings in about 4 minutes. And on the way out, Lucius Malfoy was standing in the atrium talking to the Minister for Magic, and he looked at Harry and smiled and did not say a word. Between the summons and the trial, Harry lived at number 12, Grimmauld Place, headquarters of the Order of the Phoenix, which was also the ancestral home of the House of Black. It was the first time in Harry's life that he walked into a building that was on his side and found it decorated in green and silver. Sirius Black lived in that house like a man in a cell, because he was the only member of the Order who could not go outside. He hated the portraits. He hated the family tree burned into the drawing room wall, with the holes where his own name and his cousin Andromeda's had been scorched out. He hated Kreacher, the house elf, who followed him around muttering about blood traitors. And Harry watched his godfather flinch at a serpent-shaped door handle, and understood, at last, exactly what had happened in the Shrieking Shack 2 years earlier. "It is not the color," Sirius said one night in the kitchen at 2 a.m, with a bottle he should not have opened. "You know that, do you not? It was never the color. It was that I spent 16 years in this house being told what I was, and I had to burn my own life down to get out of it. And then they put you in it, and I could not do anything about it, and I was in a cell." "You are still in a cell," said Harry. "Yes," said Sirius Black. "Thank you for that." There is a thing about that summer that Harry only understood later. Kreacher was in that house. Kreacher was ignored and insulted and told to get out of rooms by everybody except a boy in Slytherin colors who said good evening to him twice, because Harry had been ignored in a common room for a year and knew what it did to a person. Kreacher remembered that. Kreacher remembered it for 3 years. Hold on to it. Then term started, and the Ministry sent a teacher. Dolores Umbridge wore pink and smiled, and spoke to children in the voice adults use for kittens, and she was the cruelest thing that ever taught in that castle. Her first move surprised everybody, and it should not have. She invited Harry Potter to tea. "I have been reading your file, Mr. Potter," she said, pouring. "Slytherin house, a good, sensible house, ambitious children who understand how the world is arranged. Now, I do not believe for a moment that you are the disturbed little liar the prophet describes. I believe you are an ambitious boy who told a dramatic story about a dead classmate and cannot find a way to climb down. So let me build you a ladder." The ladder was simple. Harry would say publicly that he had been confused. In return, the Ministry would be very generous. There would be a special award. There would be, in due course, a career at the Ministry. "And Cedric?" said Harry. "A tragic accident in a dangerous tournament," said Dolores Umbridge. Harry put the cup down and said no, and did it in the flattest, politest way he could manage. And Dolores Umbridge never forgave him for the politeness more than the refusal. He wrote lines with a black quill that cut the words into the back of his hand. "I must not tell lies." He wrote them for weeks. He did not tell Professor McGonagall, and he did not tell Snape, and he did not tell Dumbledore. And if you want to know why, it is because he was 15, and he had spent 4 years learning that in his house, you never show anybody where you are bleeding. Hermione Granger noticed in November, took his hand across a library table, turned it over, and cried. Then she said, "Right. If she will not teach us to defend ourselves, we will teach ourselves. And you are going to run it. Nobody will come," said Harry. "Hermione, look at me. Half the school thinks I am the reason Cedric is dead, and the other half thinks I am the next Dark Lord in waiting. "Then they can come and see," said Hermione. 28 people came to the Hog's Head that Saturday. It took 2 hours, and it very nearly did not happen. And the thing that saved it was not Harry. It was Neville Longbottom standing up in a dirty pub and telling a room full of people in a shaking voice that his parents were in a locked ward at St. Mungo's Hospital because of the people Harry Potter said had come back, and that he did not care what tie Harry wore, and that he was signing 28 names on a piece of parchment, 25 of them from 3 houses. The other 3 were Slytherins, and getting them cost Harry more than anything else he did that year. Daphne Greengrass came first because she had told him in a common room a year earlier to remember that she had said it first. Tracy Davis came because Daphne told her to. And Theodore Nott came alone, 3 weeks late, and stood in the door of the room of requirement while 30 people stared at him. Theodore Nott's father was a Death Eater. Everybody in that room knew it. 2 Gryffindors got their wands out. "My father was in the graveyard," said Theodore into the silence. He came home and told the house about it at dinner. He described the boy tied to the headstone, and he was pleased. He looked around the room. "I am not asking anybody here to like me. I am asking to be taught the shield charm, because I would like to be able to stop something one day, and there is nobody at my house who will teach me." Harry said, "Get in a line then." Half the room hated it. 2 people left that night and did not come back, but Dumbledore's army in this timeline had 3 snakes in it, and that fact was going to matter more than anyone in that room could imagine on the 2nd of May, 1998. They met all year in a room that made itself. They learned disarming and stunning and shield charms, and by spring, in a room full of 15-year-olds, Harry Potter taught the Patronus charm and watched a hare and an otter and a terrier and a Jack Russell fill the air with silver light. Meanwhile, Umbridge built her own army and called it the Inquisitorial Squad. It was Slytherins, handpicked. Draco Malfoy took his badge in about 4 seconds. She offered Harry one first. She offered it to him in front of the entire common room, deliberately, because she understood that a house is a market and she wanted to buy the most expensive thing in it in public. Harry looked at the badge on her pink palm and at 50 people watching and said, "No, thank you, Professor." And a 4th-year Slytherin girl at the back of the room started to clap. Then somebody else did. Then Daphne Greengrass, who was standing on the stairs, said clearly, "He said no, Professor." And Dolores Umbridge walked out of the Slytherin common room, having lost the room, and the house never entirely came back to her. The army was betrayed in April, and everyone in the castle knew exactly who had done it. The Slytherins, obviously. Not obviously. Everybody said it in the corridors before anybody had checked. It was Marietta Edgecombe, a Ravenclaw, whose mother worked at the ministry and whose face broke out in purple spots spelling the word sneak because Hermione Granger had jinxed the parchment in October, just in case. Harry never forgot the 2 hours in between, when 30 people looked at Theodore Nott, and Theodore Nott stood in the corridor with his back to the wall and did not defend himself, because he had spent his whole life learning that there is no point. Dumbledore took the blame for the whole army in his own office, told Cornelius Fudge that he had organized it, and left the castle rather than be arrested. Umbridge became headmistress. That was also the winter of the occlumency lessons. Twice a week, in the dungeon, Snape went into Harry's head and threw him out of his own memories, and Harry got worse at it instead of better, because he was 15 and being told to empty his mind of everything by a man he could not stand and could not get away from. It ended when Harry saw a memory that was not his. A boy his own age hanging upside down in the air with his robes over his head while a crowd laughed, and the boy was Severus Snape, and the one holding the wand was James Potter. Snape threw him out of the office and never taught him again. And so, in June, When Harry saw Sirius Black being tortured on the floor of a long dark hall full of shelves, he had no way to tell whether it was real, and no shut door in his mind to keep it out. It was not real. It was bait, put there deliberately, and it worked perfectly. 6 of them went to London on Thestrals. Harry, Ron, Hermione, Neville, Ginny, and Luna Lovegood. 6 children in a ministry basement at midnight, and no Sirius anywhere in it, and only a small glass sphere on a shelf with 2 names on the label. Then, the Death Eaters came out from between the shelves, and Lucius Malfoy held out his hand and asked for the prophecy. They fought their way through the Department of Mysteries. Ron was strangled by a brain. Hermione was hit by a curse that stopped her heart for a moment. Neville Longbottom broke his own wand and kept fighting with the pieces. And then the order came through the doors, and Sirius Black was laughing, actually laughing, dueling his cousin Bellatrix on a dais, taunting her. The red light hit him in the chest, and he fell backwards through the veil in the middle of that room and did not come out the other side. Harry tried to go in after him. Remus Lupin held him around the chest with both arms and told him it was too late, over and over, until the words meant something. The prophecy smashed on the floor. Voldemort came, and Dumbledore came, and they fought in the atrium in front of the fountain until the Minister for Magic himself walked out of a lift and saw Lord Voldemort standing in his own building. It took the death of Sirius Black to make the government admit the war had started. They put Harry in the headmaster's office afterwards, and he broke about 40 pounds worth of silver instruments, and Dumbledore let him. Then Dumbledore told him the prophecy, the whole of it. That a boy born as the 7th month died would have power the Dark Lord knew not, that Voldemort would mark him as his equal, and that neither could live while the other survived. He heard half of it, said Dumbledore. A servant of his overheard the first part in a public house and carried it to him. That is why he came to Godric's Hollow. That is why your mother died. The prophecy became true because he chose to believe it. He made his own enemy. Harry sat with that for a long time. There is something else, he said at last. And you have known it for 5 years, and you have not asked me. Yes, said Dumbledore. I have. When the hat sorted me, it took 4 minutes. It said there was something inside me that was not mine. It said it was old, and it had been there since before I could talk, and that it would want things. Harry's voice was steady, which frightened him. I have not told anyone, not Ron, not Hermione, not Sirius. I asked you twice, sir, when I was 11 and when I was 12, and both times you said not tonight. Albus Dumbledore, who had been alive for well over a century and had been called the greatest wizard of the age by people who meant it, put his ruined black hand flat on the desk and looked at a 15-year-old boy. I know, he said. I have known since the 1st of September, 1991, that the hat found something in you it had no word for. I watched it hesitant. I have thought about those 4 minutes on most days since. Then why? Because I cared about you too much, said Dumbledore, and because I am a coward in one very specific way. I have arranged this war for 50 years, and I have been prepared to lose almost anything in it, not you. So every year I told myself that you were still a child, and that one more year of ordinary happiness was worth more than the truth. And every year you had less ordinary happiness than I imagined, and I did not look closely enough to notice, because if I had looked, I would have had to speak. He stood up and walked to the window. There is one more thing I owe you. When the hat put you in Slytherin, I made a decision within about 10 seconds, and I have never told anyone what it was. I decided to keep my distance from you. I told myself it was for your safety, so that Voldemort's people in that house would not report that Dumbledore was grooming the Potter boy. That was true. It was not the whole truth. What was the whole truth? That I was frightened, said Albus Dumbledore. "Not of you, of what the hat's hesitation might mean, and of what I might have to do about it one day. And so I put an old man's distance between us, and you spent 5 years believing that the headmaster of this school had no particular interest in you, and I let you believe it, and I am sorrier for that than I am for almost anything else in a very long life." Harry Potter did not forgive him that night, but he understood him, and understanding is where forgiveness starts, and they had 1 year left. The war came out into the open that summer, and this is what it looked like. Bridges fell down in front of Muggle traffic cameras. Fog sat on the country in July. The Prophet printed lists of the missing. Ollivander's shop in Diagon Alley was empty, with the door swinging, and Draco Malfoy came back to Hogwarts in September with his father in Azkaban, his mother alone in a house full of Death Eaters, and a task he could not tell anybody about. He also came back with something on his left forearm, and he took to changing his shirt with the curtains shut. Harry noticed on the second night of term, because Harry slept 4 feet away from him and had done so for 5 years. That is the whole of the 6th year in one sentence. In another world, Harry Potter spends a year following Draco Malfoy on a magical map, being told by everyone that he is obsessed and wrong. In this world, he does not need a map. He knows on the second night, and knowing does not help him at all. "Ask him," said Ron. "He is a Malfoy. He will lie." "Then tell McGonagall." "And say what? That my dormitory mate keeps his sleeve down?" Harry pushed his hands into his hair. "They will search him, find nothing, and he will know I looked. And whoever gave him the job will find out I looked. And then they kill his mother to keep him working." Hermione Granger, who had gone very quiet, said, "Harry, you are not trying to catch him." "No," said Harry. "You are trying to get him out. That is the 6th year. Everything else in it hangs off that decision, and the decision was noble and it was a catastrophe. The rest of the year happened around it. Horace Slughorn came out of retirement to teach potions, and Snape got the defense job at last, which everybody in the castle noticed and nobody understood. Slughorn had been head of Slytherin House 40 years before, and he collected people, and the first thing he did was gather up the promising ones for little dinners. He adored Harry, not for the scar, or not only. He adored him because Harry Potter was, in Slughorn's phrase, the most interesting thing to come out of my house in half a century. And he said it at dinner in front of 9 students while Harry stared at the tablecloth. Harry was also, that year, unexpectedly brilliant at potions because he had been given a battered second-hand textbook out of the cupboard with corrections in the margins in small cramped handwriting, signed on the inside cover. "This book is the property of the Half-Blood Prince." He used the spells. One of them was called Sectum Sempra, and next to it, the previous owner had written, "For enemies." The Quidditch, briefly, because it matters for one reason. Harry captained the Slytherin team in his 6th year, and Draco Malfoy did not play and did not give a reason, and it was the first evidence Harry had that whatever was happening to Draco was eating him alive from the inside. Dumbledore, meanwhile, was teaching Harry in his office, not spells, memories. They went into a pensive week after week and watched a shabby house with a snake nailed to the door, and a beautiful ruined woman named Merop, and a boy in an orphanage who kept trophies from other children in a box, and a 16-year-old with a prefect badge asking a fat, flattered teacher a question he should not have asked. The last memory was tampered with. Somebody had gone into it and torn a hole and stitched a lie over it, and the somebody was Horace Slughorn. And the question the boy had asked him was about Horcruxes. "A Horcrux," said Dumbledore, "is the object in which a person has concealed a part of his soul after splitting it by an act of murder. While it exists, he cannot die. I believe Tom Riddle made more than one. I believe he made 6 and meant to make 7, and I cannot prove any of it or begin to find them, until I have the true version of that conversation. Getting that memory is the best thing Harry Potter ever did with the house. He never chose. He did not use a lucky potion. He went to Slughorn's office on a wet Tuesday and sat down and talked to him about Slytherin House. He talked about being 11 and ignored under a lake. He talked about a common room that clapped for him when he won and put a dead frog in his bed when he lost. He said that everybody outside that house thought it was a factory for producing one particular kind of man, and that everybody inside it knew that was not true and never said so out loud, and that Professor Slughorn had spent 40 years teaching those children and knew better than anybody what they actually were. And one of them asked you a question when you were both young, said Harry. And you have spent 50 years deciding that answering it made you what he became. Horace Slughorn started to cry. I told him, he whispered. He asked how many a soul could stand, and I said 7, because 7 is the most powerfully magical number, and I said it the way you say something clever at a dinner table. I have never told a living person, if I give you this, you will see me being vain and stupid and flattered by a boy. Yes, said Harry, and then we will use it to end him. That is the trade. Slughorn put his wand to his temple and pulled out the silver thread and handed over the worst thing he had ever done. The Horcruxes, they worked out, were 7. The diary Harry had already destroyed at 12 without knowing what it was. A ring, which Dumbledore had already found and destroyed, and which had cost him his right hand and, though he did not say it, most of the year he had left. A locket, a cup, something of Ravenclaw's, and the snake, and one more, which Dumbledore did not name, and which he had known about since a boy in a hat took 4 minutes to be sorted. Now, Draco. Harry tried everything. He tried talking, and Draco laughed at him. He tried following, and lost him. He tried leaving a note unsigned saying, I know, and Draco went so white in the Great Hall that Blaise Zabini asked if he was ill. A first-year Slytherin ended up in the hospital wing after touching a cursed necklace in Hogsmeade. A Gryffindor drank poisoned mead in Slughorn's office, and only survived because Harry had read about a Bezoar in a margin. Both were attempts on Dumbledore. Both went wrong and hurt children instead. And in March, in a corridor on the first floor outside a flooded bathroom, Harry cornered him properly. Draco Malfoy was crying. That is the part nobody expects. He had his hands on a cracked sink and he was sobbing like a small boy. And when he saw Harry in the mirror, he span round with his wand already up. Do not, said Harry. Draco, whatever it is, I will go to Dumbledore tonight. Tonight, he can hide your mother. He can hide all 3 of you. He has done it for other families. I have seen the letters. You do not understand anything, Draco screamed. He is in my house. He sleeps in my house. He sits in my father's chair at the table, and my mother has to pour his wine. Then let me help you. You are Harry Potter, said Draco Malfoy. You cannot help me. You are the reason. Every single thing that has ever gone wrong in my life has had your name on it. And he threw a curse, and Harry threw one back without thinking, and the word that came out of his mouth was one he had read in a margin. Sectum Sempra. Draco Malfoy went down in 6 inches of water with his chest opened up, as if by a sword, and his blood went out across the wet floor in ribbons. Harry dropped to his knees and slipped, and could not remember a single healing spell. Severus Snape came through that door within 20 seconds, because Severus Snape had spent that entire year with one ear on where those 2 boys were. He knelt in the water. He sang a counter-curse over the wounds 3 times, and the blood ran backwards, and the skin closed, and Draco breathed. Then he stood up and looked at Harry, and said, in a voice Harry had never heard him use, Where did you learn that? A book, sir. Whose book? Harry did not answer. He did not have to. He watched a man work out that his own handwriting from 25 years ago had just been used to nearly kill a child in his own house, and he watched something in Snape's face come apart and get put back together in about 4 seconds, which is a thing Snape had presumably had a lot of practice at. Harry was banned from Quidditch, given detention for the rest of the year, and told to hand over the book. He hid it in the room of requirement instead, in a room like a city of lost things, on a shelf under a stuffed troll and a chipped bust of an old wizard wearing a tarnished tiara. Walk past that tiara. We come back to it in a year. Draco Malfoy came out of the hospital wing in 4 days and finished his task in 8 weeks, and there is a straight line between those two facts. Because he was frightened now. Not of Voldemort. He had always been frightened of Voldemort. He was frightened that Potter would go to Dumbledore and that his mother would be dead by Sunday. So he stopped being careful. He got the vanishing cabinet working. On the last night of June, Albus Dumbledore took Harry Potter to a cave on a cliff by the sea to fetch a locket out of a basin of poison. Harry made him drink it because Dumbledore made him promise to. And then he pulled a 120-year-old man out of a lake full of the walking dead with a wall of fire and half a memory of a Patronus. They came back to a dark mark hanging green over the astronomy tower. You know most of what happened up there. Dumbledore froze Harry under the invisibility cloak with a wordless spell before the door opened, so that he had to watch and could not move or speak or breathe loudly. Draco Malfoy came up the stairs with his wand out and disarmed the greatest wizard of the age, who did not resist. And then Draco stood there and could not do it. "You are not a killer," said Dumbledore, quite kindly. "I have to be," said Draco. "He will kill my mother," he said her name. "Then let me help you. I can hide her tonight. Draco, I am a better hider than he is a hunter." And here is the moment this timeline gives us that no other one does. Because Draco Malfoy hesitated, and the hesitation had 2 things in it, not one. It had a boy who did not want to be a murderer. And it had 5 years of sleeping 4 feet from Harry Potter, being beaten by him at Quidditch, being humiliated with him, being clapped for with him, being nearly killed by him and then healed in the same room, and hearing him say in a corridor in March that Dumbledore hid families. He lowered the wand about an inch. He was going to say yes. Nobody in this story will ever be able to prove it, but he was. Then 4 Death Eaters came through the door behind him because the vanishing cabinet had been open for an hour. And Severus Snape came up the stairs last and looked at Dumbledore, and Dumbledore said his name once, not as a plea. As a reminder, the green light hit Albus Dumbledore in the chest and threw him backwards over the battlements, and he fell and did not stop. The spell on Harry broke when Dumbledore died, because Dumbledore had cast it, and Harry Potter came out from under a cloak into a tower full of murderers, alone, screaming, and chased Severus Snape down 8 flights of stairs and across the grounds. He threw curses at his back the whole way. Snape blocked everyone without turning round. Harry shouted the Half-Blood Prince's own curse at him, the one that had opened Draco Malfoy like a book, and Snape whirled and swatted it out of the air and shouted back the only words he said to Harry that night. "You dare use my own spells against me, Potter. I am the Half-Blood Prince." Then he was over the boundary and gone. With Draco Malfoy running beside him, they buried Albus Dumbledore by the lake in the first week of July, and the whole school came, and the merpeople sang under the water, and the centaurs fired arrows into the air at the edge of the forest. Harry Potter sat through it in green and silver in a row of Slytherins, and about half of that row was not there because half of Slytherin House had already been taken home by their parents. Afterwards, he opened the locket from the cave, and it was not the locket. Inside, there was a scrap of parchment, and it said, "To the Dark Lord. I know I will be dead long before you read this, but I want you to know that it was I who discovered your secret. I have stolen the real Horcrux, and intend to destroy it as soon as I can. I face death in the hope that when you meet your match, you will be mortal once more." It was signed with 3 letters. R-A-B. Harry read it 4 times and did not know who that was. But if you have been paying attention to a house with a burned family tree on the drawing room wall and a bitter old elf who was the only one who ever said good evening back, you already do. He did not go back to school in September. Nobody did really, in the way that matters. The ministry fell on the 1st of August in the middle of Bill Weasley's wedding, when a silver lynx came down into the marquee and said that the minister was dead and that they were coming. Harry, Ron and Hermione went out through the hedge and did not come back for 10 months. The new order in Britain was announced within a week, and here is the part that only this timeline could produce. Lord Voldemort did not call Harry Potter a criminal. He called him a defective. The prophet ran it on the front page, undesirable number 1, and underneath, in smaller print, the official line from the new ministry. That Harry Potter, of Slytherin house, a Parselmouth, a boy of the old blood, had been groomed and manipulated for 6 years by Albus Dumbledore and his muggle-loving order, and that any of his housemates who had followed him had been led astray by a clever fraud, and that they would be forgiven if they came home. It was very well written. It was aimed at exactly one audience, which was every Slytherin between 11 and 18 and their parents, and it half worked, which is the honest and unpleasant answer. Slytherin house at Hogwarts that year did not become a house of heroes. Most of them kept their heads down. Some of them joined the Carrows and enjoyed it, but not all of them. Not this time. Severus Snape was headmaster. Amicus and Electo Carrow taught dark arts and Muggle studies and used the Cruciatus Curse as a detention. And in the middle of it, Dumbledore's army came back, and it was run by Neville Longbottom and Ginny Weasley and Luna Lovegood until she was taken off the train at Christmas. They painted slogans on walls. They stole things. They got caught and beaten and came back the next week. And when Neville Longbottom needed someone to tell him which corridors the Carrows were walking on a Tuesday night, the information came from a 6th-year girl with pale gold hair who sat at the green table and looked bored. Daphne Greengrass ran messages inside Hogwarts for the whole of that year and was never caught, because nobody on either side ever suspected the Greengrass girl of caring about anything. Out in the country, 3 teenagers lived in a tent. They had the real locket by then because they had walked into the Ministry of Magic under Polyjuice Potion and taken it off Dolores Umbridge's neck. And they had no idea how to destroy it, so they took it in turns to wear it because leaving it lying around felt worse. The locket talked. Not out loud. It talked in the wearer's chest, quietly, all day. To Hermione, it talked about being unwanted, and about the exact word Ron had used when he was 11, and about the fact that her parents in Australia had a nice life now and no daughter in it. To Ron, it talked about being 6th, and about being poor, and about his mother's face when she looks at Harry. And at night, when Harry wore it, it did not talk about any of that. It said, in a voice like a boy of 16 in a black diary, "They put you at my table. 4 minutes under that hat, and it still gave you to me. You have never once belonged anywhere else. These 2 are borrowing you. Go home." In November, Ron Weasley walked out of the tent in the rain. He came back in December, but he walked out first, and it took the locket about 4 months of whispering and 1 argument about food to do it. And neither of the boys ever pretended afterwards that it had not happened. And that is when Harry finally said it. It was 3 days after Ron left. Hermione had not spoken since morning. They were walking a moor in the cold, and she was crying without any sound at all, which was the worst thing Harry had ever watched. So he made her sit on a rock, and he told her about the 4 minutes. "There is something inside me that is not mine," he said. "That is what the hat said. Word for word. I was 11. It said it was old, and it had been there since before I could talk, and that it would want things, and that whatever it was not the whole of me." Hermione Granger stared at him. 6 years, she said. I know. You have known for 6 years, and you never said. Who was I going to tell? Said Harry. Dumbledore knew and would not talk about it. Sirius could not have heard it. It would have destroyed him. Ron would have said something kind and been frightened underneath. And you. He stopped. You would have gone to the library and found out what it was. Yes, said Hermione Granger. I would. She was quiet for a long time, and then she said, Harry, how many did Dumbledore say there were? 7. And how many did he name? Harry did not answer. Neither of them said the word for another 5 months, but both of them knew from that afternoon on the moor, and everything they did afterwards was done by 2 people who had done the arithmetic and were not talking about it. They went to Godric's Hollow on Christmas Eve and found a ruined house with a hole in the upstairs wall and 2 graves in the churchyard with the frost on them, and an old woman who was not an old woman at all. The snake came out of her neck and very nearly finished the war that night. Harry got out of that cottage with his wand snapped in half, which is the single worst thing that happened to him all year. The sword came out of a frozen pool in the Forest of Dean under a silver doe, and Ron Weasley came back at the same moment and pulled Harry out of the water when the locket tried to drown him. Then they opened the locket on a rock, and the thing inside it came out as a cloud, and it built 2 figures out of smoke to break Ron Weasley before he could swing. It showed him his mother saying she had always wanted a different son. It showed him Harry and Hermione telling him he was the least of the 3. And it turned to Harry and said, out of a mouth of smoke, in a voice that was Harry's own, They gave me to your house, Ron. They gave me to them at 11, and none of you ever thought about what that meant. Ron, said Harry, it is a liar. It has been lying to all of us for 4 months. Do it. Ron Weasley brought the sword of Gryffindor down through the locket and split it in half. Afterwards, sitting on the frozen ground with his hands shaking, Ron said, 2 of us have used that sword now. Yes, said Harry. A Slytherin got it first, said Ron. I would like that recorded somewhere. They were caught in March by snatchers in a wood and taken to Malfoy Manor and put in front of the drawing room fire while Bellatrix Lestrange screamed at a goblin about a vault. Hermione had hit Harry with a stinging jinx in the wood, and his face was swollen into something unrecognizable. So Lucius Malfoy called his son over to the prisoner and told him to identify the boy. Draco Malfoy stood in his own drawing room and looked at a face he had woken up next to for 6 years. I cannot tell, he said. It could be. The face is wrong. Look at him properly, Draco, said Lucius. If it is him, everything comes back to us. Everything. Look. I am looking, said Draco Malfoy. I do not know. He knew. That is not a redemption. He did not free anybody. He stood in a room while Hermione Granger was tortured on the floor 20 feet away, and he did nothing at all, and he had to live with that for the rest of his life, and he did. But he lied to his father's face about Harry Potter at 17, with Lord Voldemort's name in the air, and it bought about 4 minutes. 4 minutes was enough for a house elf to come down into a cellar. Harry got both hands on Draco Malfoy's wrists in the middle of that drawing room and tore 3 wands out of his grip, and it was the most ordinary thing he had ever done, and it decided the war. They got out through the apparition wards because Dobby broke them and they landed on a beat. And Dobby had a silver knife in his chest, thrown from a drawing room floor at the last second. Harry dug the grave himself with a spade, without magic, because it took an hour and he needed the hour. He wrote on the stone, "Here lies Dobby, a free elf." Then he went and asked a goblin how to get into a vault at Gringotts, because there was a golden cup in the Lestrange vault, and Bellatrix had just made it very clear how frightened she was of anybody knowing that. They robbed Gringotts and escaped on a blind dragon, and the moment they hit the water, Harry felt Voldemort find out, and his mind came open like a door in a storm, and he saw everything. He saw a rage that had never been touched before. He saw the diary, the ring, the locket, the cup, all counted, all gone. And he saw one last thought before it slammed shut. A tower, a school, something hidden in a school by a boy who had loved that castle more than any person alive. "Hogwarts," said Harry. "It is at Hogwarts. It always was." They walked into Hogsmeade at nightfall on the 1st of May, and a bar owner with a familiar blue eye hid them in his pub, and a portrait of a girl walked away down a painted tunnel and came back with Neville Longbottom. Neville Longbottom, in May 1998, had a broken nose, a split lip, one eye swollen shut, and the calmest face Harry had ever seen on him. "You are late," said Neville. The room of requirement had about 30 people living in it. Dumbledore's army, the ones who could not go home, and the ones who had refused to go home. Ginny Weasley, Luna, back from a cellar, Seamus, Dean, the Creevy brothers, Ernie, Hannah, Cho, Terry, Michael, Lavender, Parvati. And in the corner, on a camp bed, with his arm in a sling, Theodore Nott. "They took him in February," said Neville. "Carrows found out he had been passing Daphne the patrol rota. He has been in here since. He will not go out, and he will not go home, because if he goes home, his father will kill him. Literally kill him, Harry. He said it at the dinner table in front of guests." Theodore Nott lifted his good hand about 4 inches in greeting and did not say anything. "Daphne Greengrass is still out there in the green common room, pretending she has never had a thought in her life," said Neville. "She has been running our messages since September. If this goes wrong tonight, somebody has to know that, so now 2 of us know." Then Harry Potter stood on a chair in the room of requirement and told 30 people that he needed to find something that had belonged to Rowena Ravenclaw, and Luna Lovegood said that everyone had seen it, because there was a statue of Ravenclaw in her own house tower wearing a diadem. And Harry remembered a room full of lost things and a chipped bust with a tarnished tiara on its head on a shelf where he had hidden a potions book a year before. He also remembered the corridor outside it and turned to the door, because the room had to become the other room, and the other room was where he had hidden the book, and the whole thing took him about 90 seconds and cost the life of a boy he had shared a dormitory with for 7 years. Because Draco Malfoy came into that room after him with Crabbe and Goyle, wanting to take Harry Potter to the Dark Lord and buy his family back, and Vincent Crabbe, who had spent 7 years being told what to do and had just spent a year being taught the Cruciatus Curse by a professional, set fire to a mountain of 1,000 years of lost property with a curse he could not stop. Fiend fire does not go out. It becomes animals and it eats. Harry and Ron and Hermione came out of that inferno on 2 broomsticks with Draco Malfoy hanging off the back of one and Gregory Goyle unconscious over the other. And they left Vincent Crabbe in there because there was nothing left of the shelves he had been standing on. The diadem came out of the fire in Harry's hand, cracked and screaming, destroyed by the fire it had been thrown into. Draco Malfoy lay on the corridor floor and stared at the ceiling and made a sound that Harry never described to anybody afterwards. Then the castle shook because the wards had broken and the Battle of Hogwarts had started. Here is what happened in the Great Hall an hour earlier, and it is the moment this entire timeline has been walking towards for 7 years. Professor McGonagall stood on the dais and told the school that Lord Voldemort was outside the gates, that the students of age could stay and fight, and that everyone else would be evacuated through the Hog's Head. And in the world, she looks at the Slytherin table and has them removed. All of them. In one instruction. And it is not unfair, exactly. And it is not fair either. And for the rest of that night, the House of Salazar Slytherin sits in a pub in a village while a castle burns. In this world, she opened her mouth to say it, and a seventh year stood up at the green table before she could. "Some of us are staying," said Daphne Greengrass. The hall went silent. McGonagall said, "Miss Greengrass, do not be a fool." "I have been carrying notes for Longbottom since September," said Daphne. "Ask him, and Nott is in the room of requirement with a broken arm because he got caught doing it, and Tracy is standing next to me." She lifted her chin. "You can search us if you like. There is not time, so I am telling you instead, and you can decide whether a Slytherin has ever told you the truth before." Down the table somebody hissed at her to sit down. Millicent Bulstrode picked up her bag and left with about half the house, and some of them left because they were frightened, and some of them left because they were going to the other side. And that happened, and it should be said, but 11 of them stayed. 11. Out of a house of about 140. It is not a triumphant number. It is the number you get when a boy spends 7 years being ordinary in front of people who were taught that nobody is ever ordinary in front of them for free. Astoria Greengrass, who was in her 5th year and should have been evacuated, hid in a suit of armor on the 4th floor and refused to come out, and spent the whole night dragging wounded people out of corridors and into the hospital wing, and lived. The battle itself does not need retelling here. You know its shape. Centaurs came out of the forest. The house elves came up out of the kitchens with knives, led by an old elf in a filthy tea towel who was screaming about the Dark Lord's locket and about Master Regulus, because Creature had worked out 3 years too late whose side he was on and was making up for it with a carving knife. Fred Weasley died in an explosion in a corridor with his brother Percy beside him, mid-joke. Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks died in the Great Hall and left a son who was 1 month old. Colin Creevey, who was 16 and had sneaked back in, died. And Theodore Nott died on the 4th floor landing with his arm still in a sling, dueling 2 masked Death Eaters at once so that a group of 4th years could get down the stairs behind him. One of the masks came off in the fight, and it was his father. And everybody who was on that staircase agreed afterwards that Theodore had known before the mask came off and had kept casting anyway. Harry Potter watched the last of it from the shrieking shack through a gap in a crate, because that is where the snake was, and where the snake was, Voldemort was. He watched Lord Voldemort explain to Severus Snape, quite reasonably, that the Elder Wand was not working properly for him, and that this was because Snape had killed its last master, and that the wand's loyalty therefore had to be cleared up. Then, Nagini's cage came through the air, and Severus Snape died on the floor of a filthy room, and Voldemort walked out without looking back. Harry crossed the floor. Snape was still alive, just, and he grabbed the front of Harry's robes and pulled him down and said, "Take it, take it." Silver leaked out of his eyes and his mouth. Hermione put a flask in Harry's hand. "Look at me," said Severus Snape. He looked at Green Eyes for 4 seconds, and then he stopped, the pensive in the headmaster's office at 1 in the morning on the 2nd of May. Harry Potter watched a whole life go past in about 20 minutes. A thin boy in a playground telling a red-haired girl she was a witch. A friendship that broke on 1 word. A man on a windy hillside begging Dumbledore to hide her and being told he disgusted him. A man on his knees saying he wished he were dead. And then, 13 years later, a sorting. Harry watched a memory of himself, 11 years old, sitting under a hat for 4 minutes, and he watched the staff table watching him, and he watched Severus Snape's hands go flat on the table when the hat said, Slytherin. He watched Snape come to Dumbledore's office that same night, white with fury, and say, "You will move him. Put him in Gryffindor. Do it tonight. Tell them the hat misfired. I do not care what you tell them. Half of that dormitory writes home to men I knelt with." "I cannot overrule the hat, Severus," said Dumbledore. "Then he is in my house." "Yes, with me." "Yes," said Dumbledore, "for 7 years, and you will keep him alive, and you will do it without letting one of them see that you would like to, which means you will have to be very cruel to him in public for a very long time. I am sorry. I would not ask if it were not the only door." And Severus Snape stood in that office and said, "The boy has her eyes in his face, and he will hate me by Christmas." "Yes," said Dumbledore, "he will." "Then he will hate me," said Snape. The last memory was the one Harry had come for, and it was 6 months old. An old man with a blackened hand telling his one spy that on the night Voldemort's curse rebounded in Godric's Hollow, a piece of the soul that was in that room latched itself onto the only living thing left in the building, that the boy had been carrying that piece ever since, that the snake had to die, and then the boy had to die at Voldemort's own hand and no other. "So the boy must die," said Snape's voice. "Yes. You have kept him alive so that he can die at the right moment. Do not be shocked, Severus. How many men and women have you watched die?" "Lately? Only those whom I could not save," said Snape. He walked down through a castle full of the wounded and the dead, and out across the grounds and into the forest, and he did not tell anybody where he was going, except one person. Neville Longbottom was in the courtyard with blood on his face, propping up somebody who could not stand. "Neville," said Harry, "if I am not here, kill the snake. It is the last one. Somebody has to know." "Where are you going?" said Neville. "To end it," said Harry. He opened the snitch on the way with his teeth, and there was a black stone inside it, cracked across the middle, and he turned it over 3 times in his hand. They came out of the dark and walked with him. His mother, his father, Sirius, Lupin, who had been alive 4 hours ago. "Does it hurt?" said Harry. "Dying?" said Sirius Black, quicker and easier than falling asleep. "I am sorry," said Harry, "about all of it, and Sirius, I never said, in the shack, when you saw my tie." "Harry," said Sirius, "I have had 3 years and a war to think about it, and I got there in the end. You were not put in that house. You were sent into it. There is a difference, and everybody in this clearing knows which one you are." "Stay with me," said Harry. "Until the very end," said his father. He walked into the clearing where Lord Voldemort was waiting with 30 Death Eaters around him, and he did not raise his wand. The green light came, and it took the piece of soul that had been sitting behind his eyes since he was 1 year old, and Harry Potter woke up in a bright, empty place that looked a little like King's Cross Station. Albus Dumbledore was sitting on a bench. "I have wanted to have this conversation with you since the 1st of September, 1991, he said. "The hat was right," said Harry. "The hat was right," said Dumbledore. "It felt the fragment. It had no name for it, because there is no word in any hat's vocabulary for a piece of a living man's soul stitched into a child. So it did the only thing an old enchantment could do, which was to put you where such a thing might be watched, and to warn you, and to tell you the truth about it in the same breath. It told me it was not the whole of me. That is the truest sentence anybody said to you in 7 years, said Dumbledore, and it was said by a hat in about 4 seconds when I could not manage it in 5 years. He leaned forward. Harry, it is gone now. He killed it himself in the forest, exactly as it had to be. And you have a choice, which is more than most people get. You may go on, or you may go back. If I go back, said Harry, can I end it? Oh, I think so, said Albus Dumbledore. He got up off the floor of the forest. The rest happened in the great hall in front of everybody left alive because Voldemort wanted an audience one last time and could not stop wanting one. Neville Longbottom pulled the sword of Gryffindor out of the sorting hat while it was on fire on his own head and took Nagini's head off with one swing. That is the third person to draw that sword in this story. And every single one of them did it without asking for it. And then Harry Potter threw off the cloak in the middle of the great hall, and the two of them circled the room in the sunrise while the whole school stood back against the walls. Voldemort talked. He always talked. He told them all that the boy had been his from the beginning, that the hat had known it, that Salazar's house had raised him. "You are not going to win this," said Harry. "Do you want to know why? Because Severus Snape was never yours. He has been Dumbledore's since the night you killed my mother. He never stopped. And that wand you are holding was never yours either." Draco Malfoy disarmed Dumbledore on that tower, so the wand answered to Draco. And I took Draco Malfoy's wand off him in his own drawing room 2 months ago, with my hands. He raised his mother's son's snapped and mended holly wand. "So it is mine," said Harry Potter, "and it will not kill me for you. Try it." They fired at the same moment. Green light and red light met in the middle of the Great Hall, and the Elder Wand turned in the air and flew across the room and landed in Harry's free hand. Tom Riddle fell backwards onto the flagstones with his arms out, and he was as dead and as ordinary as anybody else in that hall. There was a great deal of noise after that. There always is. 2 days later, when the noise had stopped and the bodies had been moved and the students who were going home had gone, Harry Potter walked up a spiral staircase into the headmaster's office with a scorched, ancient, filthy hat under his arm, because somebody had left it lying on the floor of the Great Hall and nobody else had picked it up. He put it back on its shelf between 2 dead men's portraits. He was almost at the door when it spoke. "4 minutes," said the Sorting Hat. "Do you know, that is the longest I've ever taken. I was rather pleased with it afterwards." "You put me in the wrong house," said Harry. "I put you in the house that was watching," said the hat. "And you spent 7 years in it being watched, and at the end of it, 11 of them stayed in a burning castle for you. You did not turn into what everybody was afraid of, Harry Potter. You turned a small number of frightened children into something nobody had ever bothered to ask them to be. It sagged on its shelf. I do not get to choose what a person becomes. I only get 4 minutes. I have to be right about where to put them and then hope." Harry stood in the doorway of an office full of sleeping portraits. "Was it worth it?" he said. "Ask the 11, said the hat. He went down the stairs and out into a courtyard full of mourning, where Ron Weasley and Hermione Granger were sitting on a broken wall waiting for him. And beyond them, Neville Longbottom was directing 4 people carrying a table, and a girl with pale gold hair was arguing with Professor McGonagall about where the Slytherin wounded were going to be put. And that is the whole difference. In the timeline, you know, Harry Potter is saved from Slytherin House by 4 words under a hat. In this one, nobody saves him from it. He goes in at 11, alone, unwanted by both sides of a hall, and he spends 7 years there, being decent in front of people who had never once been given a reason to be, and it costs him a childhood, and it saves a wing of the castle on the 2nd of May. The hat did not make him a Slytherin. It just put him somewhere and told him the truth about what he was carrying. Everything else, he did. That is Curious Potter for tonight. If you want to know what happens when the hat gets 4 minutes over a different child entirely, there is a boy born one day before Harry, in a house with a family that never came home, and I have been thinking about him for weeks.